My older brother snapped his fingers right in my face. Two sharp clicks echoing off the glass walls of our Columbus boardroom. He did not even look at me. His eyes remained locked on the billionaire venture capitalist sitting across the mahogany table. "Grab the coffee orders, Charlene," he said. He waved a hand toward the door like he was shooing away a stray dog. "And make sure my notes are typed up before you sit in the corner. Do not speak unless I ask you to pull up a slide." My parents sat in the observation chairs by the door. They beamed with pride at his leadership. My brother was wearing a custom suit bought on my corporate credit line. He was pitching a company he did not own, using numbers he did not understand. He had just introduced me to the lead investor as just the secretary. He had no idea the woman sitting across from him already knew my name was the only one on the patent. Before I tell you about the boardroom takedown that stripped him of his fake crown, take a second to hit subscribe to the Intimately Told Stories channel. Let me know in the comments how old you are and where you are listening from today. Let me take you back to where the trap was set 6 months earlier. The autumn wind rattled the windows of our headquarters. I sat alone in the main conference room. The blue light of my tablet illuminated the pitch deck I had spent 3 weeks building. NovaLogix was my creation. I wrote every line of the healthcare logistics algorithm. I secured every early client. But my parents, John and Patricia, could not stand the thought of their golden boy struggling after his 3rd business bankruptcy. They begged. They laid on the guilt. They demanded I give Bradley a title to save his pride. So I gave him Vice President of Sales. An empty title for an empty suit. The conference room door banged open. Bradley strolled in. He smelled of expensive cologne and unearned confidence. He did not ask what I was doing. He simply reached across the table and snatched the tablet right out of my hands. I watched his eyes scan the financial projections I had meticulously calculated. "This is good," he murmured. His thick fingers tapped the glass screen. "Really good. I am going to need you to change the presenter name on the title slide to mine." I folded my hands on the table. My pulse remained steady. "You want your name on the technical pitch, Bradley." He dropped the tablet back onto the table. The glass clattered against the wood. "Of course I do, Charlene. You are great at the admin stuff. You keep the break room stocked, but these New York investors need to see a real leader, a visionary. You lack the killer instinct for the big leagues. Make the changes." He leaned over me. He planted his palms on the table and invaded my space. "Make sure the coffee is hot when they get here. And wear something professional for once." I did not argue. I did not defend my intellect or my ownership. I looked up at him and smiled. It was a cold, practiced smile that never reached my eyes. I reached out, pulled the tablet back toward me, and nodded. "Whatever you say, Bradley. I will make sure your name is front and center." He puffed out his chest. He straightened his silk tie and walked out of the room. He thought he had bullied a secretary into submission. He did not realize I had just handed him the rope he would use to hang himself. I knew the investors were not flying to Ohio for his manufactured charisma. They were coming for my data. And the higher he climbed on his pedestal of lies, the harder the concrete would feel when I finally kicked it out from under him. My cold smile in that conference room was not a sudden reaction. It was a reflex forged 13 years ago on a humid July afternoon in the driveway of our suburban home. I was 18 years old, holding a freshly printed lease agreement. My father stood on the porch gripping a clipboard and a stern expression. He handed me a pen and explained that it was time for me to learn the harsh realities of the real world. He stated that nothing was free, and that charging me market-rate rent for my childhood bedroom would build character. I swallowed the lump in my throat and signed the document, feeling the sharp sting of early independence. The ink was barely dry on my signature when a flatbed tow truck rolled into our quiet cul-de-sac. Strapped to the back of the truck was a brand new silver sports coupe, gleaming under the midday sun. My mother rushed out of the front door, clapping her hands in sheer delight. Bradley bounded down the stairs, barefoot and victorious. He had just finished his sophomore year of college with a flat C average after failing basic accounting twice. My parents handed him the keys to a $40,000 vehicle to celebrate his effort. I stood on the asphalt holding my rent contract, watching my brother slide into the driver's seat. I inhaled the scent of fresh leather and burning rubber as he revved the engine while my father patted his shoulder in deep approval. That single afternoon taught me a permanent, agonizing lesson about the reality of my family dynamic. Love and support were biological lotteries I had unequivocally lost. If I wanted security, I had to build a fortress out of legal documents, ironclad patents, and blind trusts. I realized early on that shared blood meant nothing in the face of blinding favoritism. Ownership meant everything. That memory anchored my patience as I prepared for the pivotal venture capital meeting. Bradley possessed a dangerous combination of unearned confidence and crippling ignorance regarding our logistics software. If he felt threatened or insecure, he might actually try to read the technical manuals out of spite or paranoia. I needed him docile. I needed him distracted by his own reflection. I stayed late on a Tuesday evening after the bullpen cleared out to execute the first phase of my strategy. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed a low, steady rhythm as I sat alone in the quiet office. I opened a sophisticated drafting software on my computer and generated a highly realistic investment term sheet. It was a flawless forgery, bearing the watermarks of a fictitious holding company and dense legal jargon I had memorized from actual negotiations. I scrolled down to the equity distribution table. Beside the name Bradley Cole, I typed a clean, undeniable 50%. I printed the document on heavy textured cardstock. The paper carried a distinct weight, making it feel official and expensive to the touch. I left it sitting in plain sight on the edge of my desk, right next to his favorite brand of imported sparkling water. The next morning, I sat in my cubicle, typing lines of complex code. The glass partition of my workspace provided a perfect mirror reflecting my desk behind me. Bradley sauntered in 10 minutes late, holding a half-eaten pastry and complaining about the morning traffic. He reached for his water. His eyes snagged on the thick cardstock resting near the bottle. I watched his reflection closely. His chewing slowed to a halt. He picked up the paper. His eyes darted across the dense text, searching for his own name. When he found the equity distribution line, his entire posture shifted. The tension drained from his shoulders. A slow, smug grin spread across his face, replacing any lingering insecurity. He set the paper back down exactly where he found it, pretending he had never seen a thing. The transformation was instantaneous and beautiful to witness. For the past 2 weeks, he had been nervously flipping through the Novologix user guide, trying to memorize keywords so he would not sound foolish. That afternoon, I heard a soft thud near the recycling bin. He had tossed the technical manual away. He spent the rest of the day practicing his putting stroke on the carpet in the hallway. He felt entirely safe. He believed the phantom 50% shielded him from having to understand the actual mechanics of the business. The red herring worked flawlessly. He abandoned any attempt to learn the software, thereby guaranteeing his failure in a real pitch environment. With his intellect pacified, I moved to neutralize his future retaliation. A man like Bradley would not walk away quietly once his fragile pride shattered. I needed leverage so undeniable it would override any parental guilt trip they might throw my way. I needed a felony on paper. I scheduled a brief meeting with him just before lunch. I handed him a sleek black titanium corporate credit card. It was heavy and cold to the touch. I told him our upcoming investors expected the vice president of sales to project undeniable success. I encouraged him to use it for client dinners and networking events. I deliberately omitted the strict $50,000 limit I had personally authorized with the banking representative. I called the card a necessary business tool. Internally, I called it the honeypot. Bradley snatched the heavy metal card from my hand. His eyes gleamed with raw, unregulated greed. He did not ask about expense reporting policies. He did not request receipt tracking software. He slid the black titanium into his designer wallet and told me to get back to my spreadsheets. The notifications began appearing on my secured phone within 48 hours. Every time he swiped the card, a silent alert popped up on my encrypted digital ledger. I sat at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the numbers climb with grim satisfaction. $2,000 vanished at an exclusive country club on the north side of town. I checked our client roster, verifying we had 0 active leads anywhere near that golf course. 3 days later, another notification flashed across my screen. $4,500 spent at a boutique menswear outfitter downtown. I logged into the banking portal and saved the itemized digital receipt. 3 custom-tailored suits. The following week brought a steady deluge of lavish, fraudulent charges. $700 at a premium steakhouse for a lunch for 2. $1,000 for courtside basketball tickets. $2,000 for premium liquor shipments delivered directly to his personal apartment. He strutted around the office wearing those stolen suits, treating the floor like his personal runway. He tossed his dry cleaning receipts onto my keyboard, ordering me to process them before 5 o'clock. He snapped his fingers when he wanted a fresh notepad or a different brand of coffee. He referred to me loudly as his administrative assistant in front of the junior developers, making sure they knew their place. He called our mother on speakerphone from the hallway, boasting that he was single-handedly carrying the logistics startup on his back. Every insult felt like a tiny pebble hitting a reinforced stone wall. It did not hurt because I possessed the one thing he lacked: total awareness. I was not absorbing his abuse. I was compiling a meticulous criminal dossier. Embezzlement in the state of Ohio escalates to a severe felony, depending on the exact financial threshold crossed. I watched the progress bar on my hidden spreadsheet inch closer to that critical red line. $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 of stolen company funds bleeding from the accounts. I needed the theft fully documented, unarguable, and severe enough to warrant genuine prison time. If I brought a minor financial discrepancy to my parents, they would simply write a personal check to cover his tracks and dismiss the entire event as a simple accounting misunderstanding. I needed a crime they could not afford to bury under their checkbook. Every swipe of that black titanium card added another structural steel support to the trap I was building. I smiled whenever he handed me a fraudulent expense report. It was a cold, calculated expression he repeatedly mistook for sibling submission. He thought he was draining my resources to fuel his vanity. He was actually weaving his own legal noose with every luxury purchase. The snare was set perfectly. The bait was swallowed whole. I just had to wait for the New York investors to arrive and spring the lock. But Bradley could never just sit quietly in his unearned privilege. He always needed to push his boundaries further to assert dominance over me. His next move would physically displace me from the very headquarters I secretly owned. The gentle chime of the lobby elevator signaled the arrival of my next test. It was a rainy Thursday morning, and the glass doors of the headquarters slid open to reveal my parents. John and Patricia stepped onto the polished concrete floor of the reception area. My father wore his usual pristine golf attire, despite the pouring rain outside. My mother trailed closely behind him, smelling sharply of floral perfume and aerosol hairspray. Between them, they carried a heavy, damp cardboard box. I watched from the glass walls of my corner office as they bypassed the receptionist and marched directly toward my workspace. Bradley was already waiting for them. He had arrived 20 minutes earlier, pacing the hallway with a cup of premium coffee in his hand. When he saw our parents approaching, his chest puffed out. He opened my glass door without knocking and ushered them inside. My mother placed the heavy cardboard box directly onto my neat stack of quarterly financial reports. The damp bottom of the cardboard immediately stained the crisp white paper. I looked inside the box and saw a collection of faded brass and chipped plastic. They were Bradley's collegiate intramural lacrosse trophies. At the very top rested a large, hollow silver cup, declaring him the most valuable player of a minor regional tournament from over a decade ago. Patricia did not offer a greeting. She simply looked around my spacious office, nodding in firm approval at the floor-to-ceiling windows and the sprawling view of the Columbus skyline. She turned her attention to me and plastered on a bright, patronizing smile. "Charlene, sweetheart, we need to make a logistical change today," she announced. Her voice carried that distinct Midwestern sweetness designed to mask a direct order. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and waited for the punchline. "Bradley has a very important role to play with these upcoming New York investors," she continued, gesturing toward my brother, who was busy admiring his reflection in the window. "The optics of this workspace are crucial. People need to walk in and see a strong, commanding leader sitting behind this desk, a man in charge of the operation. It projects confidence. It projects stability." She walked around the mahogany desk and stood right beside my chair. She reached out and patted my cheek. Her manicured nails felt cold against my skin. "You do such wonderful administrative work for him, Charlene," she said, her tone dripping with unearned pity. "But a secretary does not need the premium real estate. We found a lovely open cubicle right near the break room. It is much closer to the coffee machine and the supply closet. It will make your daily tasks so much more efficient. Bradley needs this space to secure the future of the company." My father stood by the door, folding his arms across his chest, offering his silent, enabling consensus. Bradley smirked, crossing his arms to mirror our father. They waited for the argument. They expected tears or a fiery defense of my territory. They craved the drama so they could label me hysterical and justify the eviction. I did not give them a single drop of satisfaction. I simply nodded. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my leather laptop sleeve. I unhooked my computer, gathered my charging cables, and picked up my encrypted hard drive. I did not take any pens or paper clips. I left the mahogany desk entirely bare, save for the damp cardboard box of tarnished sports trophies. I walked past my father, past my brother, and past my mother, without uttering a single syllable. I stepped out of the glass enclosure and made my way toward the bullpen. The walk across the open floor plan felt like a public execution to the junior staff watching from their monitors. They saw the founder of the company being displaced by an arrogant usurper. They exchanged nervous glances, pitying my sudden demotion. But their pity was misplaced. They did not understand the profound tactical advantage of my retreat. I was not walking the plank. I was descending into the engine room. The physical displacement served as a perfect metaphor for our family dynamic. Bradley claimed the corner office representing hollow vanity and superficial status. I claimed a gray fabric cubicle situated between a humming refrigerator and a microwave that perpetually smelled of burnt popcorn. It was the nerve center of structural power. The dramatic irony of the situation was a rich, delicious secret I kept buried beneath my ribs. As Patricia lectured me about the optics of premium real estate, she remained blissfully ignorant of a singular legal fact. I owned the entire commercial building. 2 years prior, when Novologix outgrew my apartment, I purchased the property through a blind trust named after my late grandmother. The property management company that collected our monthly rent reported directly to my private financial advisor. I was literally their landlord. I signed the commercial lease as the tenant and countersigned it as the owner. Every time Bradley complained about the high overhead costs of the headquarters, he was unknowingly putting money directly into my personal investment portfolio. I set my laptop down on the laminate surface of my new cubicle. Across from me sat Wyatt, my lead developer. Wyatt was a brilliant, cynical coder who survived on energy drinks and possessed a deep loathing for corporate suits. He knew the truth about the company structure. He knew Bradley was a walking liability. Wyatt looked up from his dual monitors and raised a single eyebrow at my arrangement. I gave him a brief, subtle nod. The game had entered a new phase. While Bradley spent his first hour in the corner office unpacking his plastic trophies and ordering the receptionist to order a custom brass nameplate, I opened a secure encrypted terminal. I bypassed the standard employee network and accessed the foundational architecture of the business. Wyatt had helped me construct a digital containment zone specifically for my brother. We called it the Sandbox. It was a mirrored phantom server that looked and operated exactly like our live production environment. When Bradley logged into his new corner office computer, he saw what looked like real-time data. He saw simulated client accounts, fabricated market fluctuations, and artificial email chains. He was essentially playing a highly sophisticated corporate video game. If he attempted to send an email to a real investor or a sensitive client, the Sandbox intercepted the message and routed it to a hidden folder that only Wyatt and I could read. I sat near the break room, listening to the rhythmic clack of mechanical keyboards, surrounded by the genuine pulse of the company. From this invisible vantage point, I executed my real duties. I processed the bi-weekly payroll, ensuring my engineers were compensated for their actual labor. I reviewed source code patches with Wyatt, pushing critical updates to our logistics algorithm. More importantly, I spent the afternoon tightening the legal noose around Bradley. I opened the corporate bylaws and drafted a series of localized amendments. I structured the operating agreement to mandate the biometric signature of the primary shareholder for any transfer of equity, any alteration of vendor contracts, or any authorization of external hiring. I filed the updated documents with the state registry, locking the legal door and throwing away the key. Bradley could promise the world to anyone who listened, but his signature held the legal weight of a cocktail napkin. I glanced toward the corner office. Through the glass walls, I saw Bradley leaning back in my old ergonomic chair. He had his expensive leather shoes propped up on the mahogany desk. He was holding a golf putter, inspecting the grip with a look of supreme satisfaction. He believed he had conquered the kingdom. He thought he had relegated his sister to the shadows, where she belonged. He was entirely unaware that he was sitting inside a digital quarantine, cut off from the actual functions of the enterprise. Every inch of ground he thought he was taking was actually quicksand, pulling him deeper into a trap he lacked the intelligence to perceive. But a man driven by ego can only sit in a cage for so long before he needs to test his teeth on the bars. The phantom emails and simulated spreadsheets in the Sandbox server eventually failed to satisfy his craving for dominance. He needed an audience. He needed to exert authority over something tangible, something breathing. He needed to play executive in the real world. His boredom festered into reckless ambition, setting the stage for a catastrophic operational crisis that would force me to step in and save the company from his unchecked arrogance. Sitting in the glass enclosure, Bradley felt the digital sandbox losing its luster. Pretending to command simulated spreadsheets only satiated his ego for a handful of days. He craved friction. He needed a living, breathing adversary to dominate in order to validate his fabricated authority. He found his target on a Tuesday morning when the postal carrier mistakenly placed a physical certified letter directly on his mahogany desk instead of routing it through my administrative inbox. It was the annual renewal agreement for Apex Medical Supply. Apex manufactured the specialized, temperature-controlled containers essential to our entire logistics network. Their Ohio-based facility handled 80% of our physical infrastructure. They were our lifeline. Bradley did not consult the digital archives. He did not ask for the historical pricing data. He simply picked up his polished desk phone and dialed the number printed on the letterhead. From my cubicle near the break room, I could hear his booming voice resonating through the thin glass partitions. He bypassed the standard pleasantries. He launched into a tirade demanding a 30% reduction in their manufacturing fee. He used phrases like leverage and corporate restructuring and market dominance. He spoke to the Apex plant manager, a seasoned supply chain veteran named Jim Henderson, as if Jim were a misbehaving intern. The phone call lasted barely 4 minutes. It ended not with a handshake, but with a sharp, echoing click as Jim hung up on him. 5 minutes later, my secured inbox chimed. An email from Apex Legal arrived, carrying a subject line typed entirely in capitalized red letters. Notice of contract termination. Jim was pulling their manufacturing operation entirely. Without those thermal containers, Novalogics would bleed out in less than a month. We would breach service-level agreements with every major hospital network in the Midwest. Panic is a fascinating emotion to witness in an arrogant man. Through the glass, I watched the blood drain from Bradley's face. He stared at his computer screen, his chest heaving, his customized silk tie suddenly looking like a hangman's noose. He knew he had just detonated the company. But men like my brother never absorb the shrapnel of their own mistakes. They seek a human shield. He snatched the physical folder off his desk and stormed out of the corner office. He marched across the open floor plan, his expensive leather shoes stomping heavily against the commercial carpet. The junior engineers stopped typing. The quiet hum of the bullpen evaporated. Bradley stopped directly in front of my desk and hurled the manila folder. It struck my keyboard, sending a cascade of printed spreadsheets fluttering onto the linoleum floor. "Look at this utter disaster, Charlene!" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly with suppressed terror. "Did you even review these renewal terms before putting this garbage on my desk? The vendor is furious about your sloppy paperwork. They are threatening to pull the contract because you mixed up the basic delivery schedules. I told you to verify the administrative details before I finalized the executive agreements." He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You need to fix your clerical errors right now, or I will have to find an assistant who can actually read." He stood there, panting, performing for the audience of wide-eyed developers. He was desperately trying to rewrite reality, projecting his catastrophic failure onto the easy target of his sister. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to defend my honor. I calmly reached down and collected the scattered papers. I stacked them neatly, tapping the edges against the laminate desktop to align them perfectly. I looked up at him. His eyes were wild, begging me silently to play along and save him from the abyss he had just leaped into. "I will handle the filing discrepancy, Bradley." I said, my tone perfectly flat. "Go back to your office and relax. I will correct the paperwork." He let out a loud, dramatic sigh, shaking his head for the benefit of the watching staff. "Unbelievable," he muttered, turning on his heel and retreating to the safety of his glass cage. He immediately poured himself a glass of scotch from his decorative decanter. I grabbed my keys and a fresh legal pad. I drove out of the city limits, heading toward the industrial sector of the Ohio Valley. The landscape shifted from sleek urban architecture to sprawling steel warehouses and smokestacks. I parked my car outside the sprawling Apex facility. The smell of hot metal and diesel exhaust hung heavy in the humid afternoon air. I bypassed the front reception desk, using my authorized vendor badge. I walked directly into the plant manager's office, overlooking the bustling factory floor. Jim Henderson sat behind a battered metal desk, looking angry enough to chew glass. When he saw me, Jim stood up, ready to unleash a volley of colorful Midwestern profanity. I raised a single hand, stopping him before he could speak. "I know Jim," I said, taking a seat in the vinyl chair opposite him. "My brother is a walking liability." I poured 2 cups of black coffee from the carafe sitting on his filing cabinet, passing one across the metal desk. Jim took the styrofoam cup, narrowing his eyes. "He insulted my production crew, Charlene. He demanded a steep cut like we are some desperate startup begging for scraps. I am pulling the line. I cannot do business with a man who disrespects my floor." I took a slow sip of the bitter dark roast. "You are not doing business with him, Jim. You are doing business with me. You have always done business with me." I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened the encrypted financial ledger. I turned the screen toward him. I showed him the proprietary algorithms I was currently developing to optimize his delivery routes, saving his fleet thousands in weekly fuel costs. I explained that Bradley was nothing more than a temporary corporate mascot, installed to pacify my overbearing family. "He holds a fake title," I explained, keeping my voice level and authoritative. "He has zero access to the operational funds. His signature means nothing. I own the software, I own the building, and I am the one signing your checks. I need these thermal containers." Jim stared at the hard data on my screen. The anger slowly evaporated from his weathered face, replaced by a deep, grudging respect. He realized he was not dealing with a fragile secretary defending her abusive boss. He was negotiating with a predator who had her own house entirely under control. We spent the next hour hashing out the logistics. By the time I closed my laptop, I had not just salvaged the relationship, I had leveraged the fuel optimization software to secure a 15% volume discount on all future manufacturing orders. Jim printed a new contract. I signed it right there on his metal desk using my legally binding corporate seal. The drive back to headquarters felt remarkably peaceful. I returned to the bullpen just as the afternoon sun began casting long shadows across the floor. I walked into the corner office. Bradley was slouched in his chair, staring blankly at the wall, the scotch glass empty beside his keyboard. He looked pathetic and terrified, expecting me to announce our bankruptcy. I dropped the newly signed Apex contract onto his desk. He scrambled forward, grabbing the paper. His eyes widened as he saw the signatures and the substantial 15% discount printed on the final page. "How did you—" he stammered, looking from the contract to my face. "I fixed your clerical errors," I replied smoothly. "The vendor was so impressed by your firm negotiating stance, they offered a steep discount to maintain the account. I just typed up the final numbers." Bradley stared at the document, and the delusion instantly rebooted. The terror vanished, swallowed whole by his monstrous ego. He actually believed his disastrous phone call was a masterstroke of intimidation. He grabbed his smartphone and hit the speed dial. He put the device on speakerphone. Our parents answered on the second ring. "Mom, Dad, you are not going to believe the deal I just pulled off," he shouted, leaning back in the chair and propping his feet onto the mahogany surface again. "I just strong-armed our biggest supplier into a brilliant discount. I played hardball, and they folded instantly." Patricia's voice filtered through the tiny speaker, shrill and dripping with adoration. "Oh, Bradley, that is magnificent news. We always knew you had the mind of a shark. Your father and I are so incredibly proud." John chimed in his deep voice, vibrating with validation. "Excellent work, son. That is what a real executive does." I stood in the corner of the office listening to them stroke his fabricated genius. My silent competence served as the invisible scaffolding holding up his towering fantasy. The tension in the room was a living, breathing entity. He thought he was untouchable. Emboldened by this imaginary victory, his hubris expanded beyond the confines of his glass cage. He decided that a successful executive needed an entourage. He convinced himself that running an empire of this magnitude required a loyal lieutenant. someone who mirrored his own hollow brilliance. This unchecked arrogance paved the way for his next catastrophic decision. He was about to bring an outsider into my carefully controlled ecosystem without consulting human resources or requesting a single background check. The false victory over the Apex manufacturing contract acted like premium fertilizer on Bradley's already bloated ego. He spent the next 3 days walking around the headquarters like a conquering king returning from a victorious crusade. He bought rounds of expensive drinks for himself and his friends at the local country club using the black titanium card I had provided. But a king requires a royal court. A ruler needs loyal subjects who share his distorted view of reality to validate his fabricated power. My brother decided his glass executive suite felt far too lonely. He needed a lieutenant who would look at him with unearned awe. On Monday morning, the heavy glass doors of the lobby swung wide. Bradley entered, but he was not alone. Flanking him was a man who looked like a walking advertisement for terrible financial advice. Trent was Bradley's former university roommate. During their college years, they spent significantly more time hosting underground poker games and drinking cheap beer than attending business lectures. Trent had spent the last half-decade trying to launch a cryptocurrency podcast from his parents' damp basement. He recorded daily audio segments advising his dozen listeners to invest their life savings into digital coins named after internet memes, a venture that yielded zero actual revenue and profound credit card debt. Bradley led Trent straight into the center of the bullpen. The rhythmic typing of my software engineering team slowed to a cautious halt. Bradley clapped his hands together, producing a sharp, echoing thud that demanded the attention of the entire floor. "Listen up, Team Bradley," projected his voice, ensuring it bounced off the exposed concrete pillars of the ceiling. As we prepare to scale this enterprise for the New York investors, I realized we need top-tier talent to manage our growth trajectory. I am bringing in my own trusted advisor. He patted Trent on the shoulder. "Meet Trent. He is taking over as our new director of strategy. We are disrupting the healthcare market, and Trent knows disruption." Trent flashed a blindingly white, artificially veneered smile. He wore a navy suit that pulled too tight across his shoulders, paired with a flashy gold watch I immediately recognized as a cheap imitation. He scanned the room, offering finger guns to a group of female developers who simply stared back in stunned silence. Bradley spotted me sitting in my gray cubicle near the break room. He snapped his fingers, pointing directly at my face. "Charlene, grab a notepad. I need you to type up an employment contract for Trent before lunch. His base salary will be $150,000 a year, plus a guaranteed 5% equity stake in the company. And while you are up, fetch the new director of Vanilla Latte, skim milk, extra foam." The junior developers sitting near me widened their eyes. Their faces painted a picture of sympathetic outrage. They waited for me to snap. They waited for the founder of the company to stand up and scream. Instead, I rose from my ergonomic chair with smooth, deliberate grace. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt and offered Trent a polite, vacant nod. Right away, Bradley I replied, my voice carrying an airy, hollow tone. "I will get the onboarding documents prepared immediately." I walked straight to the kitchen area. I did not steam milk. I did not brew espresso. I poured a standard cup of bitter, dark roast drip coffee from the communal pot and added a lukewarm splash of regular dairy. I walked back and handed the styrofoam cup to Trent without uttering a single word. Trent took a sip, grimaced slightly at the harsh taste, but forced a smile to save face in front of his friend. Returning to my workstation, I opened the hidden human resources portal. As the sole proprietor and legally registered chief executive officer, only my digital signature could authorize new hires, disperse company funds, or allocate equity. Bradley was simply a rogue employee making fraudulent verbal promises to a third party. This was not a mere annoyance. This was a severe breach of fiduciary duty. Offering ownership you do not possess is a profound legal violation. I created a new personnel file for Trent in the system. Under the official job title, I typed the words unpaid intern. I set his compensation tier to 0. I generated a physical access badge for him, but I opened the building security matrix and severely limited its functionality. The plastic key card I handed him later that morning would only unlock the lobby turnstiles, the ground floor restrooms, and the employee break room. Every other door in the facility, including the server room, the engineering bays, and the executive archives, would flash a denied warning upon contact. Next, I needed to establish his network credentials. I walked over to the temporary desk Bradley had dragged into the corner office for his friend. I handed Trent a sticky note with his temporary server login and instructed him to change the password immediately to secure the internal network. Standing just outside the glass partition, I watched him type. His fingers moved slowly, pecking at the keys with deliberate hesitation. I noted his exact keystrokes. Capital P, lowercase a sour d, numbers 1, 2, 3. He did not use special characters. He did not utilize two-factor authentication. He relied on the most predictable, vulnerable string of text possible. I filed that crucial detail away in my mind. A weak lock is an open invitation, and I knew Trent's lazy digital habits would prove invaluable when the inevitable implosion occurred. For the remainder of the week, the dynamic duo played startup billionaires. They locked themselves in the corner office, drawing meaningless geometric shapes on the whiteboard and watching sports highlights on their dual monitors. Occasionally, Trent would wander out into the bullpen, attempting to network with my engineers. He would lean against their desks, tossing around empty phrases like blockchain integration and synergistic scalability. My team, trained by me to ignore useless distractions, simply stared at him blankly until he awkwardly shuffled away. Watching Trent navigate the physical office provided a steady stream of quiet entertainment. On Thursday, I observed him try to enter the engineering bay to offer uninvited advice to Wyatt. Trent swiped his newly minted badge against the scanner. A sharp beep echoed, followed by a flashing red light. He frowned, swiped it again, and received the same immediate denial. He looked around, confused, before pivoting on his heel and pretending he actually just needed to use the restroom, the only door his badge successfully unlatched. He remained entirely oblivious to his quarantine status. I documented every single moment of this charade. I logged Bradley's unauthorized verbal contract offer. I archived the security footage of Trent wandering the halls like a lost tourist. I saved the network logs showing Trent's restricted profile attempting and failing to access our proprietary client data. I was weaving a dense, undeniable tapestry of corporate misconduct. Bradley was signing his own professional death warrant, convinced he was writing a masterpiece. He believed he was building an empire, but he was merely stacking dry kindling around his own feet, waiting for a single spark. Yet my brother's entitlement was a dangerous contagion, and it did not stop at the office doors. His delusional grandiosity infected his personal life, spreading rapidly to the woman who shared his last name. The boundary between corporate overreach and personal extortion was about to evaporate. My brother had brought his arrogant friend into my sanctuary, but the true invasion was looming on the horizon. His wife, fueled by the same fabricated vanity, was preparing to walk through those lobby doors with a financial demand that would push the escalating tension into a highly volatile, deeply personal territory. Bradley's delusion could not remain contained within the office walls. A man fabricating his own reality inevitably infects the people closest to him. His wife Brittany served as the perfect host for this parasitic entitlement. Brittany grew up in an affluent Columbus suburb where social currency traded higher than actual intellect. She married my brother 5 years prior, during the brief lifespan of his second failed startup, believing she had secured a permanent spot among the Midwestern elite. When his previous ventures collapsed into bankruptcy, she fiercely maintained her country club membership, prioritizing outward appearances over financial stability. Now equipped with the black titanium card I had provided Bradley, her dormant vanity erupted into a dazzling display of reckless consumption. It was Thursday afternoon when the heavy glass lobby doors swung open. The sharp, rhythmic clack of stiletto heels echoed across the polished concrete floor, breaking the focused silence of the bullpen. Brittany bypassed the receptionist without a glance. She wore a pristine white designer sundress that contrasted sharply with her heavy artificial spray tan. Oversized, polarized sunglasses rested atop her meticulously highlighted blonde hair. An imported leather handbag hung from her forearm, a recent purchase verified by my hidden ledger alerts. She marched past the junior developers, leaving a lingering trail of expensive floral perfume. She did not head toward the glass corner office. Bradley was allegedly at a networking lunch, though the GPS tracker on his company phone placed him at a high-end driving range. Instead, Brittany navigated the maze of gray fabric dividers and stopped directly in front of my cubicle. I looked up from my dual monitors, pausing a complex data migration. She reached into her luxury handbag, pulling out a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto my desk. It landed squarely on my keyboard. The heavy paper slid open, revealing a stack of premium textured invoices from a premier Columbus event planning agency. "I need these processed by the end of the business day, Charlene," she commanded. Her voice carried a shrill, piercing quality designed to ensure everyone within a 50-foot radius heard her instructions. "The caterers require a 50% deposit to secure the ballroom for next Saturday." I picked up the top sheet, inspecting the itemized list. 500 bottles of vintage champagne, custom floral arrangements featuring imported orchids, an ice sculpture carved into the shape of the Novologix logo. The grand total, printed at the bottom, hovered just under $80,000. The title of the event was printed in bold, elegant typography across the header: The Novologix Founder Celebration Gala, hosted by Bradley and Brittany Cole. I set the paper back onto the laminate surface. I kept my expression entirely neutral, locking my gaze onto her heavily contoured face. "Brittany, I cannot process this invoice," I stated, keeping my tone even and professional. "Company policy strictly prohibits utilizing corporate funds for unauthorized personal entertainment. Furthermore, we do not have a petty cash reserve capable of absorbing an $80,000 ballroom rental." Her artificially plumped lips curled into an ugly, condescending sneer. She leaned over the low cubicle wall, invading my personal workspace. The scent of her floral perfume turned cloying and suffocating up close. "This is not personal entertainment, Charlene," she hissed. "This is a strategic networking event. Bradley is about to secure millions of dollars from those New York investors. He is the face of this operation. He is the founder. He deserves a celebration that reflects his status in this industry. It is called marketing. I would not expect a secretary to understand the nuances of high-level corporate branding." I did not blink. I did not shift in my ergonomic chair. I simply rested my hands on my lap beneath the desk, allowing her to project her venom. "You are just jealous," she continued, her voice dropping an octave, adopting a vicious, mocking cadence. "You have always been so bitter, sitting in your little cubicles, typing your little spreadsheets, while Bradley builds an empire. You resent his success. You hate that he walked in here and saved your administrative nightmare, but you need to learn your place." She tapped a manicured fingernail against the invoice. "Bradley told me how much you have been struggling with the basic paperwork. He told me you almost cost the company the Apex manufacturing contract because of your sheer incompetence. He had to swoop in and rescue the deal. So here is a piece of friendly advice from the wife of your boss. Pay the invoice. Process the check. Because the minute those venture capitalists write Bradley his check next week, he is cleaning house. He is going to fire you." And nobody will hire a bitter, jealous clerk with a track record of sabotaging her own brother. The air in the bullpen grew thick. The rhythmic typing of my engineering team had halted entirely. My lead developer, Wyatt, stood up slowly from his workstation 2 rows away, his jaw tight, ready to intervene. I raised my left hand slightly, offering a silent, commanding gesture. Stand down. Wyatt paused, understanding the directive, and slowly sank back into his seat. He knew I did not require rescuing. The sheer audacity of her threat was staggering. She was standing inside a commercial building I owned, threatening to terminate my employment from a company I built from scratch using capital I generated entirely on my own. The delusion was so pure, so deeply entrenched, it bordered on clinical insanity. She honestly believed her husband was the architect of my universe. She viewed me as a disposable peasant, occupying space in their royal court. I reached out and pulled the manila envelope toward the center of my desk. I slid the itemized lists back inside the paper sleeve. I aligned the edges with the corner of my monitor, ensuring my workspace remained perfectly organized. I looked up at Brittany, offering her that same cold, calculated smile I reserved exclusively for her husband. "I understand your perspective, Brittany," I replied, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotional friction. "I will file this invoice for review." She straightened her posture, interpreting my calm response as full submission. "See," she smirked, adjusting her designer sunglasses. "Was that so difficult, Charlene? Just do your job, and maybe Bradley will write you a decent letter of recommendation when he lets you go." She turned on her heel and strutted back toward the lobby, the sharp clack of her stilettos echoing her perceived victory. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind her, leaving a tense, charged silence lingering over the engineering floor. I did not hesitate. The moment she vanished from sight, I opened the manila envelope. I placed the catering invoice face down on my high-speed desktop scanner. I pressed the flashing green button. The machine whirred, capturing high-resolution digital copies of every single page. I opened my hidden administrative portal, navigating to the encrypted evidence directory I had meticulously constructed over the past 6 months. I created a new subfolder, labeled Fraudulent Expense Demands. I dragged the digital scans into the secure vault. This was no longer just a case of an arrogant employee abusing a corporate credit card. This was an active attempt at large-scale corporate embezzlement orchestrated by an external party leveraging a fabricated executive title. It was another heavy iron rivet securing the structural integrity of my trap. I picked up the original physical documents and fed them directly into the cross-cut shredder sitting beneath my desk. The machine chewed through the heavy textured paper, reducing $80,000 worth of delusional demands into tiny, unrecognizable ribbons of trash. The continuous barrage of disrespect from my brother, the enabling silence of my parents, and now the vicious extortion attempt from my sister-in-law built an excruciating slow-burn tension deep within my chest. They were pushing me into a corner, demanding I surrender my dignity, my resources, and my life's work to feed their collective vanity. They thought they were breaking my spirit. They had no idea they were simply sharpening my blade. I glanced at the digital calendar displayed on my secondary monitor. A bright red notification glowed against the dark background. The New York venture capital firm was scheduled to arrive in exactly 48 hours. Valerie Hudson and her team of financial auditors were flying to Columbus to finalize the Series A funding. Bradley was currently practicing his firm handshake in the mirror, unaware that the ground beneath his feet was already gone. The agonizing weight of my family's entitlement was about to reach its breaking point. The facade was primed for demolition. The investors were coming, and the stage was perfectly set for a catastrophic unveiling. The morning of the Series A presentation broke, with a sharp chill bringing the distinct crispness of an Ohio autumn. Inside the headquarters, the atmosphere felt dense, charged with a suffocating electricity. Today marked the critical midpoint of my 6-month strategy. The venture capital team was scheduled to arrive at 9. I arrived at 6. I spent those 3 quiet hours walking the perimeter of the bullpen, running diagnostic checks on the server, and mentally reviewing the intricate trap I had constructed. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a simple white blouse, paired with flat, sensible shoes. I dressed for a tactical operation, not a fashion runway. Wyatt, my lead developer, arrived at 7. He carried 2 energy drinks, offering me a silent nod. He knew the stakes. He understood that today required flawless execution. We verified the sandbox environment, making sure Bradley remained digitally quarantined from our actual proprietary data. We checked the security protocols, ensuring my hidden surveillance programs were functioning seamlessly. The foundation was secure. Bradley swept through the lobby doors at 8:30, bringing a chaotic, frantic energy into the serene workspace. He carried a premium leather briefcase that contained 0 actual documents. He barked orders at the young receptionist, demanding she polish the glass front doors again because they looked smudged. He paced the length of the main corridor, running a hand through his heavily gelled hair. His custom suit draped perfectly over his frame, but sweat already beaded along his hairline. He was rehearsing his opening lines, muttering corporate catchphrases under his breath. He looked like an amateur actor, terrified of forgetting his script moments before the curtain raised. 10 minutes later, my parents walked into the reception area. John and Patricia insisted on being present for what they dubbed the crowning achievement of their son. They brought a large tray of expensive artisanal pastries, pretending it was a generous gesture of hospitality for the development staff. In reality, they wanted front-row seats to watch their golden boy conquer the financial world. My father stood near the reception desk, checking his heavy gold watch every 30 seconds. My mother smoothed the lapels of Bradley's jacket, whispering words of unearned encouragement into his ear. They formed a tight, impenetrable circle of shared delusion. I watched them from the shadow of the hallway, remaining entirely unseen, absorbing the bitter reality of their blind favoritism. At precisely 9 o'clock, 3 black luxury sport utility vehicles pulled into the circular driveway. The heavy glass doors slid open, yielding to the arrival of Valerie Hudson. Valerie possessed a reputation that preceded her by 1,000 miles. She operated a top-tier New York investment fund known for gutting inefficient startups and turning regional operations into global titans. She did not invest based on charm or firm handshakes. She invested in sharp efficiency and unassailable data. Rumors in the financial sector suggested she could spot a fraudulent balance sheet from across a crowded room. She stepped onto our polished concrete floor, flanked by 3 silent, sharply dressed analysts. She wore an immaculate navy trench coat, her posture radiating an effortless, chilling authority. The air in the lobby seemed to freeze the moment she crossed the threshold. I stepped out of the hallway shadow, intending to welcome the guest I had courted for months over encrypted emails. I took 2 strides toward the center of the lobby. Before I could extend my hand, Bradley lunged forward. He moved with a sudden, frantic desperation, terrified of losing the spotlight. He stepped directly into my path, bringing his shoulder down hard against my collarbone. The physical impact forced me to stumble backward a half step. My heel caught on the carpet, but I caught my balance before falling. He did not apologize. He did not even look at me. He simply shoved me aside, using his physical size to assert dominance in front of the new arrivals. He thrust a yellow legal pad into my chest, forcing me to grab it or let it fall to the floor. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale coffee and overwhelming panic. "Grab the coffee order, Charlene," he barked, his tone harsh and degrading. "Make sure everyone gets exactly what they want, then sit in the corner. Do not speak unless I ask you to. Pull up a slide. I am handling this negotiation." I caught a glimpse of John and Patricia standing near the pastry tray. My mother covered her mouth with a delicate hand, her eyes sparkling with intense pride. She watched her son physically shoulder his sister out of the way and saw only strong, decisive leadership. My father gave a short, approving nod, crossing his arms over his chest. They believed Bradley was taking command of the room, acting like the alpha executive they always knew he was. They witnessed gross professional misconduct and interpreted it as triumphant strength. The yellow legal pad felt rough against my fingertips. A lesser person might have snapped under the weight of the humiliation. A fragile ego would have raised her voice, demanded respect, and ruined the entire illusion right there in the lobby. But my patience was a forged weapon, hardened by years of neglect. I smoothed my features into a mask of serene compliance. I lowered my gaze, adopting the posture of a thoroughly defeated subordinate. "Yes, Bradley," I replied, keeping my voice meek and barely audible. "I will get the beverages right away." I turned away from the powerful New York investor. I did not make eye contact with Valerie. I walked straight to the executive kitchenette and gathered 5 ceramic mugs. I poured the dark roast, noting the exact preferences mumbled by the visiting analysts. The ceramic cups rattled slightly on the silver serving tray. I carried the heavy load into the glass-walled boardroom. The space felt expansive, designed to intimidate weaker negotiators. An imposing slab of polished mahogany dominated the center, surrounded by plush leather ergonomic chairs. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating floating dust motes in the sterile air. I distributed the mugs with quiet precision, moving like a ghost around the perimeter of the table. Valerie took her seat at the far end of the mahogany slab. Her analysts flanked her, opening their brushed aluminum laptops in perfect synchronization. They moved with a predatory efficiency, typing rapidly before the meeting even officially commenced. Bradley claimed the head of the table opposite Valerie. He stood tall, adjusting his silk tie, flashing a broad, blinding smile. He radiated an artificial glow, vibrating with unearned confidence. He looked ready to conquer the world, entirely unaware he was standing on a trapdoor. I retreated to a small wooden chair tucked deep into the back corner of the room near the thermostat. I sat far away from the mahogany table, holding my legal pad and a cheap plastic pen. I crossed my ankles, pulling my knees together, shrinking my physical footprint to the bare minimum. I looked every bit the invisible admin, terrified to draw attention to herself. From this shadowed vantage point, I possessed a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire room. I could see the sweat forming on my brother's brow. I could see the cold calculation in Valerie's eyes. Bradley cleared his throat loudly, signaling the beginning of his performance. He rested his hands on the polished wood, preparing to pitch a software infrastructure he did not code for a company he did not legally own, using financial projections he could not begin to comprehend. He was about to deliver a rehearsed monologue to a woman holding the power to dismantle his entire existence. The trap was officially set. The snare was pulled taut, the bait hanging precariously over the steel jaws was Bradley's own monumental ego. The performance was starting, and I sat in the silent corner pen, poised, waiting for the inevitable, glorious collapse. Bradley pressed a small black remote resting in his palm. The expansive smartboard mounted on the far wall flared to life, projecting a slide overflowing with generic stock imagery and cluttered pie charts. He puffed out his chest, straightening his posture to mimic the titans of industry he had seen in magazines. He began his monologue. For the first 10 seconds, he relied entirely on volume, projecting his voice as if addressing a crowded auditorium rather than an intimate gathering of financial experts. He spoke of synergistic alignment and holistic bandwidth integration. He waved his free hand, attempting to illustrate a soaring trajectory of revenue growth. He paced a tight circle near the head of the table, flashing his teeth in a rehearsed, artificial smile. From my secluded wooden chair, I watched the digital clock on the wall. 15 seconds passed. Bradley transitioned into his market capture strategy. It was a spectacular train wreck. He described NovaLogix as a simple trucking coordination application, comparing it to standard food delivery services. He bypassed the entire foundation of the enterprise. He neglected to mention the predictive inventory matrix. He glossed over the stochastic routing algorithm that actually reduced hospital waste margins. He was selling a cheap bicycle to people looking for a jet engine. The three analysts sitting beside Valerie stopped moving. They did not open their portfolios. They did not type a single character on their brushed aluminum laptops. They simply sat motionless, staring at my brother with a mixture of clinical fascination and profound pity. 30 seconds ticked by. Bradley noticed the lack of engagement. A bead of sweat formed at his temple, catching the morning sunlight. His cadence quickened. He started stringing buzzwords together in a frantic, desperate loop, hoping one of them would act as a magic key to unlock their approval. He mentioned disruptive paradigm shifts 3 times in a single breath. At exactly 40 seconds, the performance abruptly terminated. Valerie Hudson did not sigh. She did not express frustration. She simply raised a single manicured hand, lifting it no more than 3 inches off the mahogany surface. The gesture carried the weight of a falling gavel. Bradley froze mid-sentence. His mouth remained open, a half-formed syllable dying in his throat. The sudden silence in the boardroom was heavy, suffocating, and brilliant. "Mr. Cole," Valerie said, her voice carrying a soft, chilling resonance, "you have held the floor for nearly a minute. In that time, you have failed to identify the core architecture of the software you are pitching. You have not addressed the encryption protocols required for healthcare compliance. You are treating a proprietary machine learning environment like a regional courier service. Why is that?" Bradley swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against his tight silk collar. He gripped the edges of the table, his knuckles turning white under the strain. He attempted a charming chuckle, but it emerged as a dry, breathless rasp. "Well, Valerie," he stammered, shifting his weight from one expensive leather shoe to the other. "We like to keep the initial presentation focused on the macro vision, the high-level strategy. I can have my assistant pull up a technical slide, if you want to get bogged down in the minor details." He snapped his fingers, pointing blindly toward my dark corner without turning his head. "Charlene, find slide 14, he ordered, his voice cracking under the mounting pressure. I did not move a muscle. I kept my hands folded, resting quietly on the yellow legal pad. Valerie tilted her head, studying him, like a scientist observing a struggling insect under a microscope. "You do not need to command anyone, Mr. Cole," she stated, her tone devoid of any warmth. "We do not need to see slide 14. We already possess the technical blueprints. We also possess the unredacted capitalization table, the articles of incorporation, and the primary patent filings." The color drained rapidly from Bradley's face, leaving a pale, sickly hue. He stood, rigid, paralyzed by the sudden deviation from his fabricated script. Valerie leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. "My firm does not operate on blind faith," she continued. "We manage a multi-billion-dollar fund. We deploy forensic accountants, private investigators, and legal researchers before we ever authorize a flight to the Midwest. We pulled the Ohio State registries 3 weeks ago. We cross-referenced the proprietary signatures. We verified the ownership structure down to the last decimal point." She let the words hang in the sterile air, allowing the undeniable truth to suffocate his fantasy. "We know you hold zero equity," she said, delivering the final, devastating blow. "We know you are not a founder. You are an employee holding a vanity title. Your presence here today, your pitch, your entire executive persona is a charade." Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His brain could not process the destruction of his reality. He looked toward the glass walls separating the boardroom from the lobby. I followed his gaze. John and Patricia stood outside, their smiles replaced by masks of utter confusion. They could not hear the audio through the soundproof glass, but they could read the catastrophic shift in the room's energy. Their golden boy was drowning, and there was no life preserver in sight. "This meeting was never about hearing you speak," Valerie explained, her sharp eyes tracking his rising panic. "This meeting was a stress test. When investing capital of this magnitude, we must evaluate every potential vulnerability. A toxic, unmanageable executive liability operating within the ranks is a severe vulnerability. We needed to witness firsthand how the true architect of this enterprise handles internal friction. We needed to see if she possessed the discipline, the restraint, and the strategic patience to let a rogue element expose itself without compromising the operation." Valerie pushed her leather chair back. The wheels glided smoothly over the carpet. She stood up, bypassing the hollow man trembling at the head of the table. She turned her back to him, rendering him entirely irrelevant. Her gaze pierced through the shadows of the room, finding my secluded wooden chair. She walked the length of the mahogany slab, stopping just a few feet from where I sat. She extended her right hand, offering a firm, professional gesture of profound respect. "So," she said, a genuine smile touching the corners of her mouth for the first time, "you are the founder we flew here to meet." The physical sensation of shedding my disguise felt like drawing a deep breath after being submerged underwater for 6 months. I set the cheap plastic pen onto the yellow legal pad. I rose from the wooden chair. The hunched, subservient posture evaporated instantly. I pulled my shoulders back, straightening my spine, standing tall in my tailored blazer. I closed the distance between us. "I am Valerie," I replied, my voice ringing clear and authoritative, filling the expansive room. "Thank you for making the trip to Ohio." I gripped her hand, returning a firm, confident shake. The silent agreement passed between us. The audition was over. I had passed the test. Behind Valerie, a guttural, choking sound erupted. Bradley staggered backward, hitting the edge of the smartboard, his customized suit jacket bunched awkwardly around his shoulders. His jaw hung loose, practically unhinged by the sheer velocity of his downfall. The dynamic of the room had inverted in a single nanosecond. The invisible admin was dead. The ruthless, brilliant chief executive officer had taken the wheel. A sharp gasp of breath escaped his lips. He looked at me, his eyes wide, with a mixture of raw terror and disbelief. For half a year, he believed he was using me as a stepping stone. He suddenly realized he was nothing more than a pawn on my chessboard, manipulated into participating in his own execution. He looked frantically at the New York analysts, hoping to find a sympathetic face. They were already typing on their aluminum laptops, adjusting the official meeting minutes, recognizing the true power in the room. The humiliation fractured his fragile psyche. He could not accept the demotion back to reality. The cornered rat was preparing to strike back, desperately searching for a way to reclaim his imaginary throne. His breathing turned ragged, his chest heaving under the silk tie. His eyes darted toward the glass wall where our parents watched the silent collapse of their favored son. The tension spiked, threatening to shatter the glass itself, signaling the impending arrival of a deeply personal, highly volatile retaliation. My cold smile in that conference room was not a sudden reaction. It was a reflex forged 13 years ago on a humid July afternoon in the driveway of our suburban home. I was 18 years old, holding a freshly printed lease agreement. My father stood on the porch, gripping a clipboard and a stern expression. He handed me a pen and explained that it was time for me to learn the harsh realities of the real world. He stated that nothing was free, and that charging me market-rate rent for my childhood bedroom would build character. I swallowed the lump in my throat and signed the document, feeling the sharp sting of early independence. The ink was barely dry on my signature when a flatbed tow truck rolled into our quiet cul-de-sac. Strapped to the back of the truck was a brand new silver sports coupe, gleaming under the midday sun. My mother rushed out of the front door, clapping her hands in sheer delight. Bradley bounded down the stairs, barefoot and victorious. He had just finished his sophomore year of college with a flat C average, after failing basic accounting twice. My parents handed in the keys to a $40,000 vehicle to celebrate his effort. I stood on the asphalt holding my rent contract, watching my brother slide into the driver's seat. I inhaled the scent of fresh leather and burning rubber as he revved the engine, while my father patted his shoulder in deep approval. That single afternoon taught me a permanent, agonizing lesson about the reality of my family dynamic. Love and support were biological lotteries I had unequivocally lost. If I wanted security, I had to build a fortress out of legal documents, ironclad patents, and blind trusts. I realized early on that shared blood meant nothing in the face of blinding favoritism. Ownership meant everything. That memory anchored my patience as I prepared for the pivotal venture capital meeting. Bradley possessed a dangerous combination of unearned confidence and crippling ignorance regarding our logistics software. If he felt threatened or insecure, he might actually try to read the technical manuals out of spite or paranoia. I needed him docile. I needed him distracted by his own reflection. I stayed late on a Tuesday evening after the bullpen cleared out to execute the first phase of my strategy. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed a low, steady rhythm as I sat alone in the quiet office. I opened a sophisticated drafting software on my computer and generated a highly realistic investment term sheet. It was a flawless forgery, bearing the watermarks of a fictitious holding company and dense legal jargon I had memorized from actual negotiations. I scrolled down to the equity distribution table. Beside the name Bradley Cole, I typed a clean, undeniable 50%. I printed the document on heavy textured cardstock. The paper carried a distinct weight, making it feel official and expensive to the touch. I left it sitting in plain sight on the edge of my desk, right next to his favorite brand of imported sparkling water. The next morning, I sat in my cubicle typing lines of complex code. The glass partition of my workspace provided a perfect mirror reflecting my desk behind me. Bradley sauntered in 10 minutes late, holding a half-eaten pastry and complaining about the morning traffic. He reached for his water, his eyes snagged on the thick cardstock resting near the bottle. I watched his reflection closely. His chewing slowed to a halt. He picked up the paper. His eyes darted across the dense text, searching for his own name. When he found the equity distribution line, his entire posture shifted. The tension drained from his shoulders. A slow, smug grin spread across his face, replacing any lingering insecurity. He set the paper back down exactly where he found it, pretending he had never seen a thing. The transformation was instantaneous and beautiful to witness. For the past 2 weeks, he had been nervously flipping through the Novologix user guide, trying to memorize key words so he would not sound foolish. That afternoon, I heard a soft thud near the recycling bin. He had tossed the technical manual away. He spent the rest of the day practicing his putting stroke on the carpet in the hallway. He felt entirely safe. He believed the phantom 50% shielded him from having to understand the actual mechanics of the business. The red herring worked flawlessly. He abandoned any attempt to learn the software, thereby guaranteeing his failure in a real pitch environment. With his intellect pacified, I moved to neutralize his future retaliation. A man like Bradley would not walk away quietly once his fragile pride shattered. I needed leverage so undeniable it would override any parental guilt trip they might throw my way. I needed a felony on paper. I scheduled a brief meeting with him just before lunch. I handed him a sleek black titanium corporate credit card. It was heavy and cold to the touch. I told him our upcoming investors expected the vice president of sales to project undeniable success. I encouraged him to use it for client dinners and networking events. I deliberately omitted the strict $50,000 limit I had personally authorized with the banking representative. I called the card a necessary business tool. Internally, I called it the honeypot. Bradley snatched the heavy metal card from my hand. His eyes gleamed with raw, unregulated greed. He did not ask about expense reporting policies. He did not request receipt tracking software. He slid the black titanium into his designer wallet and told me to get back to my spreadsheets. The notifications began appearing on my secured phone within 48 hours. Every time he swiped the card, a silent alert popped up on my encrypted digital ledger. I sat at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the numbers climb with grim satisfaction. $2,000 vanished at an exclusive country club on the north side of town. I checked our client roster, verifying we had 0 active leads anywhere near that golf course. 3 days later, another notification flashed across my screen. $4,500 spent at a boutique menswear outfitter downtown. I logged into the banking portal and saved the itemized digital receipt. 3 custom-tailored suits. The following week brought a steady deluge of lavish fraudulent charges. $700 at a premium steakhouse for a lunch for 2, $1,000 for courtside basketball tickets, $2,000 for premium liquor shipments delivered directly to his personal apartment. He strutted around the office wearing those stolen suits, treating the floor like his personal runway. He tossed his dry cleaning receipts onto my keyboard, ordering me to process them before 5 o'clock. He snapped his fingers when he wanted a fresh notepad or a different brand of coffee. He referred to me loudly as his administrative assistant in front of the junior developers, making sure they knew their place. He called our mother on speakerphone from the hallway, boasting that he was single-handedly carrying the logistics startup on his back. Every insult felt like a tiny pebble hitting a reinforced stone wall. It did not hurt, because I possessed the one thing he lacked: total awareness. I was not absorbing his abuse. I was compiling a meticulous criminal dossier. Embezzlement in the state of Ohio escalates to a severe felony depending on the exact financial threshold crossed. I watched the progress bar on my hidden spreadsheet inch closer to that critical red line. $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 of stolen company funds bleeding from the accounts. I needed the theft fully documented, unarguable, and severe enough to warrant genuine prison time. If I brought a minor financial discrepancy to my parents, they would simply write a personal check to cover his tracks and dismiss the entire event as a simple accounting misunderstanding. I needed a crime they could not afford to bury under their checkbook. Every swipe of that black titanium card added another structural steel support to the trap I was building. I smiled whenever he handed me a fraudulent expense report. It was a cold, calculated expression he repeatedly mistook for sibling submission. He thought he was draining my resources to fuel his vanity. He was actually weaving his own legal noose with every luxury purchase. The snare was set perfectly. The bait was swallowed whole. I just had to wait for the New York investors to arrive and spring the lock. But Bradley could never just sit quietly in his unearned privilege. He always needed to push his boundaries further to assert dominance over me. His next move would physically displace me from the very headquarters I secretly owned. The profound silence in the boardroom stretched into an agonizing eternity. My parents stood frozen in the open doorway. The revelation that my hidden holding company paid the mortgage on their pristine retirement estate stripped away their remaining bluster. John stared down at the expensive commercial carpet, his jaw locked in a rigid line of suppressed humiliation. Patricia gripped the aluminum doorframe, her knuckles turning the color of chalk. They were effectively neutralized, silenced by the undeniable weight of their financial dependence on the daughter they had marginalized for 3 decades. The biological hierarchy they prized above all else had fractured beyond repair. Valerie Hudson did not care about our domestic theater. She operated on risk assessment and return on investment. She tapped a polished manicured fingernail against the mahogany surface, drawing the focus back to the center of the room. Fascinating family dynamics, she noted, her voice dry and clinical. However, my firm does not issue multi-million-dollar checks based on interpersonal melodrama. If NovaLogix expects a funding commitment today, I require unobstructed transparency regarding the internal operating budget. I need to see the unredacted financial ledgers right now. I turned away from my shattered parents and faced the venture capitalist. You will have unrestricted access, Valerie, I assured her. I walked to the head of the long table where my brother still leaned heavily against the wall. I did not ask him to move. I simply reached past his trembling arm and picked up the presentation remote he had dropped moments prior. I tapped a brief sequence on the plastic keypad, overriding his hollow marketing slides. The expansive smartboard flickered. The generic stock imagery vanished, replaced by my encrypted administrative dashboard. The three financial analysts sitting beside Valerie sat up straighter. Their fingers hovered over their brushed aluminum keyboards, ready to dissect the raw data. The lead analyst, a sharp-looking man named Kevin, adjusted his glasses and linked his terminal to the projection screen. We operate a highly efficient, lean infrastructure, I explained, projecting a sprawling spreadsheet onto the high-definition monitor. However, we recently identified a significant anomaly within a localized discretionary expense account. The screen illuminated with hundreds of itemized transaction logs. I highlighted a specific column, turning the text a vivid, glaring red. The numbers told an unassailable story. As you can see, I continued, my tone remaining strictly professional. Over the past 90 days, exactly $42,800 evaporated from the corporate reserves. I zoomed in on the vendor names, scrolling slowly so the New York team could digest every single line item. These are not server hosting fees or marketing expenditures, I stated. We are looking at premium country club memberships, custom-tailored menswear, and a recurring unauthorized retainer fee issued to an individual who holds no legal employment contract with this organization. Kevin, the lead analyst, did not stop at a superficial glance. He opened a secondary terminal and initiated a deep dive into the transaction metadata. The rhythmic clicking of his keyboard sounded like a ticking clock, counting down the final seconds of Bradley's freedom. I am seeing sequential withdrawals, Kevin stated, adjusting his glasses. The funds diverted to the external LLC were processed in increments designed to avoid automatic banking alerts. This indicates premeditation. The subject actively attempted to mask the destination of the corporate assets. He categorized the disbursements as software licensing fees. Valerie steepled her fingers, resting her chin on her hands. Falsifying business records to conceal misappropriated funds, she murmured. That elevates the exposure significantly. Kevin cleared his throat. I can confirm these disbursements, he announced to the room. The retainer payments were routed to a shell corporation registered to a residential basement address in the suburbs. The clothing purchases align with a boutique retailer downtown. None of these transactions correlate with any known client acquisition strategy. The remaining color drained from Bradley's face, leaving him a sickening shade of gray. His previous indignation dissolved into sheer sweat-drenched terror. He tugged at his silk collar, suddenly struggling to draw oxygen into his lungs. He understood the math. He recognized the specific threshold he had crossed. This was no longer a petty sibling dispute over office real estate or a fabricated job title. This was grand larceny. He looked at the glowing smartboard, seeing his entire future disintegrating, line by line. The dinners, the drinks, the expensive golf outings, all of it, now translated into individual counts of fraud. He had swiped that titanium card with arrogant impunity, convinced he was untouchable. Now the bill had come due, and the currency required was his liberty. Patricia gasped, a sharp intake of air that echoed in the quiet room. Bradley? she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you had permission to use those funds for networking. I did not give him the chance to fabricate a defense. He did have permission to hold the physical card. I stated clearly, addressing the entire room. I personally issued him the titanium account. I deliberately omitted the spending limit. Valerie narrowed her sharp eyes, studying my face. She recognized the architecture of the snare. You allowed him unrestricted access, she observed, leaning back in her leather chair. You gave him the tools to incriminate himself. I provided an opportunity, I corrected smoothly. A man with integrity would have filed a proper expense report. A thief takes what he believes he deserves without asking. In the state of Ohio, corporate embezzlement escalates to a severe felony the moment the stolen amount surpasses a specific financial benchmark. My father stepped further into the room, his pristine golf attire suddenly looking ridiculous amidst the high-stakes corporate execution. He reached for his wallet, an instinctive reflex honed by years of bailing his son out of trouble. "We can reimburse the company," John said, his voice cracking, lacking its usual booming authority. "Whatever the amount is, I will write a cashier's check today. We can handle this internally. There is no need to involve the authorities over a family accounting error." Valerie turned her sharp gaze toward my father, slicing through his delusion with surgical precision. "This is not a family business, sir," Valerie stated coldly. "This is an impending Delaware corporate entity seeking institutional funding. Your son stole from a corporate entity. The moment my team verified these ledgers, we became legally obligated to report systemic fraud. If we conceal this, we become accessories. Your checkbook cannot fix a felony." I looked directly at my father, who was staring at the glowing red numbers on the screen, as if they were written in blood. If I had confronted him privately about a minor discrepancy, my family would have shielded him, I explained, feeling a cold, deep satisfaction. They would have written a personal check to cover the missing funds and dismissed his theft as a simple misunderstanding. I required undeniable documentation. I turned my gaze back to the New York investors. I waited until the stolen amount crossed the felony threshold. More importantly, I waited until I had independent witnesses in the room. Now the financial auditors from a prominent venture capital firm have officially viewed the unredacted logs. The theft is part of a formal due diligence record. It cannot be swept under the rug. It cannot be minimized. It is a documented fact. Valerie let out a low, impressed breath. She looked from the staggering evidence on the board to my calm demeanor. She realized I had not merely survived my toxic environment. I had weaponized greed against the perpetrator, orchestrating a flawless legal checkmate. Bradley sank into a nearby chair, his legs seemingly incapable of supporting his weight. The expensive suit hung loosely on his deflated frame. He looked like a trapped animal, realizing the cage door had welded shut. His chest heaved as panic flooded his nervous system. The legal jeopardy was total. The corporate guillotine hovered inches above his neck, ready to sever him from his fabricated empire. The silence returned heavy with the impending consequences. John and Patricia realized their wealth could not purchase a pardon for grand larceny documented by Wall Street executives. They were watching their golden boy transform into a white-collar criminal right before their eyes. But a man driven by ego does not simply surrender when cornered. The sheer terror in Bradley's eyes began to shift, morphing into a frantic, desperate survival instinct. He knew his reputation was destroyed. He knew prison time was a mathematical probability. If he could not walk away with the company, he would try to burn it to the ground. His breathing steadied into a ragged rhythm. He glanced toward the hallway, calculating the distance to the exit. The trap had sprung, but the wounded prey was preparing for one final, destructive counterstrike that would put the entire venture capital deal in genuine jeopardy. The stark reality of grand larceny hung over the mahogany table. Bradley sat slumped in his leather chair. The tailored suit now looked like a borrowed costume, draping awkwardly over his deflated posture. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow stutters. He stared at the high-definition monitor, displaying his fraudulent expenditures. The trapped animal instinct kicked in. A predator pushed into a corner will always bare its teeth. He placed his trembling hands on the polished wood and pushed himself upward. His knees buckled slightly, but he caught his balance. He stared at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with the New York investors or our stunned parents. "I need a moment," he muttered, his voice raspy and thin. "I need to use the restroom. I feel sick." My father reached out a hand to steady him, but Bradley swatted it away. He stumbled toward the glass doors, dragging his expensive shoes across the carpet. I watched his reflection fade down the corridor. A brief flicker of intuition signaled a warning in my gut. Men fueled by unchecked narcissism do not retreat to vomit. They retreat to regroup. They seek a venue to assert control when they feel powerless. But I remained seated, projecting unwavering composure for Valerie and her financial analysts. 2 minutes passed in heavy silence. Valerie closed her portfolio, preparing to discuss the legal mechanisms of asset recovery. Before she could articulate her first syllable, my secured smartphone vibrated against the table. A sharp, discordant chime echoed from the device. It was a custom alert, programmed specifically for catastrophic infrastructure failure. I picked up the phone. The screen flashed bright crimson. Then the boardroom door swung open. Wyatt stood in the threshold. My lead developer rarely left the engineering bay. He did not wear his usual cynical smirk. His face was pale. His breathing was heavy, causing his shoulders to rise and fall in a panicked rhythm. "We have a critical sector lockout," Wyatt announced, bypassing any corporate pleasantries. "The secondary cloud matrix just went dark. Someone revoked our administrative credentials and engaged a hard encryption protocol on the client database." I stood up, my chair scraping against the carpet. The secondary matrix housed the proprietary routing logistics for every hospital network we serviced. It held the thermal container manifests. It was the beating heart of our daily operations. Without that data, critical medical supplies would sit stranded on loading docks. I bypassed my phone and stepped over to Kevin, the lead analyst. I reached across his brushed aluminum laptop, tapping a rapid sequence of override commands into his terminal. "Access denied," flashed across the screen in stark white letters. My mind raced, tracing the digital pathways. The sandbox environment I built for my brother was impenetrable. He lacked the technical vocabulary to breach a standard firewall, let alone a layered cloud server. He could not execute a sophisticated hack on his own. Then the missing variable clicked into place. Trent. During his days of wandering the office pretending to be the director of strategy, Trent had poked around the restricted subdirectories. While his physical badge limited his movement, his laptop possessed basic internal network access. Trent was an amateur who spent years running failed cryptocurrency schemes. He understood the rudimentary architecture of legacy backdoors. He must have stumbled upon an unpatched vulnerability in an outdated staging server we used months ago. I had underestimated the destructive potential of sheer boredom combined with unearned access. Bradley did not go to the restroom. He sprinted straight to Trent and ordered him to trigger the exploit. My smartphone chimed again. A text message arrived from my brother. I opened the message, reading the words glowing on the glass screen. The text was blunt, devoid of any familial sentiment. It was a digital ransom note. "I have the client database, Charlene. Trent locked the secondary server. We hold the routing schedules, the encrypted patient transfer logs, and the thermal container manifests. Give me 50% equity right now. Sign a legally binding waiver of immunity for the credit card expenses. Do it, or I wipe the cloud drive clean. You have 10 minutes before I hit delete and send this startup back to the Stone Age. The audacity was breathtaking. Facing state prison time, he chose extortion. He was holding my life's work hostage to secure a golden parachute. He was willing to risk the logistics of crucial medical deliveries just to save his fabricated pride. Valerie Hudson stood up. She walked around the mahogany table, peering at the ransom demand displayed on my smartphone screen. Her expression hardened. The faint respect she had shown me earlier vanished, replaced by the cold pragmatism of a Wall Street tactician. "This is a compromised asset," Valerie stated, her tone, dropping the temperature in the room. "A venture capital firm does not wire millions of dollars into a hostage situation. I applaud your effort to expose his embezzlement, Charlene, but if your internal security is porous enough to let a rogue employee hijack your primary deliverables, you do not have a viable company." She turned to her analysts. "Pack up your terminals," she instructed. "We leaving." My pulse hammered against my ribs. The perfect checkmate I had meticulously orchestrated was unraveling. The victory was slipping through my fingers, stolen by a desperate man utilizing a cheap digital parlor trick. If Valerie walked out those glass doors, the Series A funding evaporated. Without that capital infusion, NovaLogix could not scale. I would be left fighting a chaotic legal battle over the ashes of my own creation. My parents watched the exchange, their faces reflecting a sudden twisted hope. If Bradley destroyed the company, perhaps he could force a settlement that saved his reputation. They were silently rooting for the extortionist. I could not let this stand. I stepped into Valerie's path, blocking her exit. "Give me 10 minutes," I said, my voice dropping to a low, calm register that betrayed none of my internal adrenaline. "Do not walk out that door. You came here to evaluate a chief executive officer under extreme pressure. Consider this the final exam." Valerie studied my face. She checked her designer watch. Her gaze was unyielding, calculating the odds of my success. "You have exactly 10 minutes, Charlene," she replied. "After that, my team is on a flight back to Manhattan." I turned to Wyatt. "We need to bypass the legacy portal," I told him, keeping my instructions sharp and focused. He shook his head, his eyes wide with stress. "We cannot run a brute force decryption in 10 minutes. Trent scrambled the hash keys. If we input the wrong override, he set up a dead man switch. The data will purge automatically. The entire logistics web will crash." I closed my eyes, shutting out the sterile boardroom lighting. I needed to pivot. I needed to shift the battlefield. A direct frontal assault on the server would trigger the deletion, but I did not need to hack the server. I needed to hack the human element holding the keys. I visualized the layout of the bullpen. I pictured Trent sitting at his desk, sweating, nervous. A coward operating vastly out of his depth. He was the weak link in Bradley's sudden offensive strike. My brother possessed the blind arrogance to burn the building down, but his accomplice lacked the stomach for a genuine felony conviction. The ticking clock echoed in my mind. 9 minutes remained. I walked out of the glass boardroom, leaving the investors and my disgraced parents behind. I strode down the corridor toward the engineering floor. The tension spiked, tightening my chest. The cost of failure loomed large, casting a long, dark shadow over my future. If I could not neutralize this threat, everything I built would be erased by a spiteful sibling. But the conflict was about to metastasize far beyond the office network. As I prepared to confront Trent, a new, catastrophic external threat was already brewing outside our headquarters, aiming to destroy my reputation before I could even reach the server controls. I strode down the corridor with less than 9 minutes remaining on Valerie Hudson's invisible ticking clock. My focus narrowed onto the engineering bay, where Trent sat guarding his stolen digital hostage. Before I could cross the threshold connecting the hallway to the bullpen, my lead developer intercepted my path. Wyatt held his smartphone outward. His knuckles were pale white, gripping the device with white-hot tension. "Look at the regional business networks," Wyatt urged, his voice tight with alarm. "She is tagging our entire client roster." I took the device from his hand. The bright screen displayed a video uploaded mere seconds ago to several prominent Columbus executive forums and professional networking feeds. The footage featured my sister-in-law. Brittany sat in the pristine, brightly lit foyer of her suburban home. She wore a designer cardigan draped over her shoulders, but her hair was intentionally disheveled. Mascara ran down her cheeks in careful, calculated streaks, designed to simulate raw distress without ruining her cosmetic contouring. She stared directly into the camera lens, producing a series of forced, theatrical sobs. "I need someone in the Columbus business community to help us," Brittany pleaded, her voice trembling with fabricated terror. "My sister-in-law, Charlene Cole, has suffered a severe psychiatric break. She has hijacked the Novologix headquarters. She locked my husband, the chief executive officer, in a boardroom and is threatening to destroy the medical supply logistics for the entire state. She is unhinged. Please, if anyone from Apex Medical or the regional hospital networks is watching, you need to suspend your contracts immediately before she ruins your supply lines." Beneath the video player, a cascade of blue hyperlinks glowed against the white background. She had meticulously tagged every major hospital administrator, clinic director, and supply chain vendor in our portfolio. The post was already gaining traction, accumulating shares and shocked reactions from local industry leaders. The conflict had just metastasized, breaching the secure walls of our office and spilling into the public domain. Bradley knew he could not outsmart me in a boardroom, so he deployed his wife to execute a scorched-earth public relations catastrophe. A shadow fell over my shoulder. Valerie Hudson stood in the corridor behind me, having followed my hasty exit. She watched the tearful performance playing on the small screen. Her features hardened into a mask of pure glacial pragmatism. "I can navigate a frozen server," Valerie stated, her tone flat and unforgiving. "I deal with technical sabotage regularly, but a public relations disaster of this magnitude is a terminal diagnosis for a startup. Institutional healthcare providers flee at the first hint of executive instability. If that video remains credible for another hour, your valuation drops to 0. You have 6 minutes left, Charlene." The walls of the corridor felt as though they were inching inward. The pressure threatened to crush the oxygen from my lungs. A conventional founder would have panicked. A fragile leader would have called the police or recorded a frantic rebuttal video, trapping the company in a public mudslinging contest. I did neither. I handed the smartphone back to Wyatt and looked across the open floor plan. My gaze locked onto Trent. He sat at his temporary desk, situated near the break room. He was nursing a lukewarm coffee, staring intently at his monitor. A thin sheen of perspiration glistened on his forehead. He was bouncing his right leg in a rapid, nervous rhythm. He did not look like a hardened corporate saboteur. He looked like a frightened amateur who had waded into deep water without a life vest. I did not need to crack the military-grade encryption guarding the secondary cloud matrix. Attempting a brute force hack would trigger the dead man switch and purge the data. I did not need to hack the server at all. I needed to hack the fragile, terrified human holding the key. I remembered the sticky note. I remembered watching him hunt and peck his initial credentials on his keyboard days prior. I walked swiftly to my own vacant cubicle. I slid into the ergonomic chair and pulled my keyboard forward. I bypassed the standard security gateways and navigated directly to the administrative override portal for individual employee profiles. I pulled up Trent's designated user file. The system prompted me for his specific authentication token. I typed a capital P, followed by a lowercase a, s, s, w, o, r, d. I finished the sequence with the numbers 1, 2, 3. The screen blinked once. The security prompt vanished, granting me unfettered access to his personal company dashboard, his messaging history, and his hidden directories. Trent possessed the digital hygiene of a careless teenager. I opened his document folder. The first file gleamed like a gold coin at the bottom of a murky pond. It was a digital copy of the Articles of Organization for a shell corporation. The document listed Trent as the registered agent for the exact LLC receiving the fraudulent retainer fees Bradley had embezzled. Trent was not merely an innocent bystander following bad orders. He was a documented financial co-conspirator. I dug deeper, clicking into his active internal messaging cache. A private chat window between Trent and Bradley sat open and populated with recent timestamps. The digital trail laid out their entire clumsy conspiracy. Bradley had sent a message 30 minutes prior. "Lock the secondary server now. Use the back door we found. Hold the thermal container manifests until she surrenders the equity." Trent had replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. But the most valuable piece of leverage rested in the subsequent message block. Bradley had forwarded a text thread from his personal phone directly to Trent's desktop client. It contained a scripted monologue. It was the exact verbatim script Brittany had just recited in her tearful public video. Bradley had orchestrated the smear campaign from the corner office, typing the lies and feeding them to his wife to coordinate the social media blast with the server lockout. I highlighted the entire chat history, exported the files, and downloaded them onto my secured tablet. I stood up from my cubicle and walked across the bullpen. The junior engineers, sensing the predatory shift in my demeanor, parted like water clearing a direct path to the fake director of strategy. I stopped directly behind Trent's chair. I leaned down, bringing my mouth just inches from his ear. I did not yell. I kept my voice pitched at a quiet, lethal whisper. Under the Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 2913, Section 02, grand theft is a felony of the 4th degree. I murmured, watching the hair on the back of his neck stand up. However, when you couple that with digital extortion and accessory to corporate sabotage, the prosecutor will seek consecutive sentences. Trent froze. His bouncing legs stopped instantly. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his artificial veneers hidden behind pale, trembling lips. "I know about the Shell LLC, Trent Eichen." Continued tapping my tablet against the back of his chair. "I know you are the registered agent receiving the stolen corporate funds. I also possess the time-stamped chat logs proving you and Bradley premeditated a ransomware attack on a vital medical supply network. Do you understand federal judges do not offer leniency to crypto podcast hosts who disrupt hospital logistics? You are looking at a decade inside a state penitentiary." He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed, tracking the sheer terror flooding his system. The fabricated bravado he wore all week shattered into dust. "I did not want to do this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Bradley told me it was just a hard negotiation tactic. He said you would cave and we would all get rich. I did not know he was stealing real money." "Ignorance is a terrible legal defense," I replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from my blazer. "You have 60 seconds to unlock my server. If the data matrix glows green, I will allow you to walk out of this building unbothered by law enforcement. If you hesitate, I will call the fraud unit and have you escorted out in handcuffs before Valerie Hudson reaches the airport." Trent did not hesitate. His hands flew across his keyboard. He bypassed his own deadman switch, inputting the decryption keys with frantic, desperate speed. I watched the command prompt on his screen process the override. A moment later, Wyatt shouted from across the room. "The matrix is green," Wyatt confirmed, relief washing over his features. "The server is unlocked. The data is entirely secure." I looked down at Trent. "Hand me your phone," I demanded. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his device. He unlocked the screen and surrendered it into my waiting palm without a single word of protest. I scrolled through his text messages, verifying he possessed the original, unedited communications from Bradley, detailing the fake video script. "Get out of my building," I ordered, pointing toward the lobby. Trent grabbed his jacket and sprinted toward the glass doors, leaving his cheap briefcase behind. I turned back to the corridor where Valerie Hudson waited. I handed her Trent's unlocked phone, displaying the raw text messages. I then presented my tablet, showing the corporate chat logs. "The video is a coordinated extortion attempt, engineered by a desperate man facing embezzlement charges," I explained. My tone crisp and victorious. "We hold the written blueprint of their conspiracy. My legal counsel will issue a targeted cease and desist, accompanied by these raw texts. Brittany will publicly retract her statements and issue a formal apology within the hour, or she will face a ruinous defamation lawsuit. The public relations crisis is neutralized." Valerie reviewed the glowing screens. The strict, rigid lines of her face softened into an expression of profound, undeniable respect. She handed the devices back to me. "You turned his only allies into the very instruments of his destruction," Valerie observed, her voice laced with genuine awe. "I have evaluated hundreds of chief executives. Very few possess the foresight to weaponize their enemies' incompetence so efficiently." The server was safe. The smear campaign was dismantled. The investors were secured. But the conflict required one final resolution. Bradley remained hidden inside his stolen glass corner office, entirely unaware that his accomplices had defected and his extortion plot lay in ruins. Stripped of his leverage and facing imminent ruin, a desperate man will always attempt to salvage a final piece of the prize. He was preparing a pathetic, frantic maneuver to steal the physical source code, ensuring the climax of this corporate war would end exactly where it began. The heavy glass doors of the lobby swung shut, sealing the exit behind the fleeing figure of the fake director of strategy. The immediate threat of the server lockout dissipated into the cool, filtered air of the engineering bay. I stood in the corridor alongside Valerie Hudson, watching the quiet efficiency of my development team return to normal. The crisis was averted, but the architect of the chaos remained inside the building. Extortion is a weapon of the desperate, and when a desperate man realizes his primary weapon has jammed, he rarely waves the white flag of surrender. He reaches for a smaller, hidden blade. Bradley was still barricaded inside the glass walls of his stolen corner office. He was entirely unaware that his accomplice had sprinted out of the facility, or that his fabricated public relations nightmare had been dismantled by his own documented text messages. He was waiting for my surrender. He was waiting for a signed equity transfer that would never arrive. I gestured for Valerie to follow me. We walked silently away from the open bullpen, navigating a narrow hallway that ran behind the executive suites. This corridor housed our internal security monitoring station, a small, windowless room filled with diagnostic monitors and network surveillance feeds. Wyatt was already sitting at the primary console, his fingers dancing across a glowing mechanical keyboard. "Bring up the internal feed for the corner office," I instructed, keeping my voice low and measured. Wyatt tapped a final sequence of keys. The largest monitor on the wall flickered, illuminating a high-definition live video feed of my brother. Bradley was pacing the length of the mahogany desk like a caged predator, realizing the zoo gates were locked. He clutched his smartphone, staring at the blank screen. He typed a rapid message, his thumb striking the digital keyboard with heavy, frantic pressure. He waited. He typed another message. He held the device to his ear, pacing faster, his leather shoes squeaking against the commercial carpet. "Trent is not answering his texts," Wyatt observed, leaning back in his ergonomic chair. "The ransom deadline expired 2 minutes ago. He knows his leverage is gone." I watched the color drain from my brother's face through the digital feed. The manufactured bravado he wore like a tailored suit dissolved, leaving only the raw, unfiltered terror of a man facing imminent ruin. The embezzlement charges hung over his head. His extortion plot had evaporated into the digital ether. He understood that walking out of that room empty-handed meant walking straight into a criminal indictment. He needed an insurance policy. He needed a tangible asset he could leverage or sell to secure his survival. He stopped pacing. His eyes darted around the spacious office, landing on the dual monitors resting atop the desk. A dangerous, predatory calculation washed over his features. He is shifting to his contingency plan, I stated, studying his frantic movements. He cannot hold the data hostage anymore, so he is going to steal the blueprints. Valerie crossed her arms over her pristine navy trench coat, her gaze fixed on the surveillance screen. Corporate espionage, she murmured. A classic exit strategy for a failing executive. On the screen, Bradley rushed to the desk and dropped to his knees. He yanked open the bottom drawer, rummaging through the scattered files and office supplies. He produced a sleek, high-capacity, solid-state thumb drive. He stood up, his breathing visibly erratic, and jammed the silver device into the primary port of his desktop computer. Wyatt immediately opened a secondary window on the surveillance console, displaying a real-time log of the network traffic originating from the corner office terminal. He is bypassing the simulated sandbox environment, Wyatt announced, tracing the glowing lines of code. He is utilizing the executive override credentials he forced the receptionist to give him last week. He thinks he is accessing the root repository. What is he targeting? Valerie asked, stepping closer to the monitors. The proprietary source code, I replied, my tone devoid of any alarm. He is attempting to download the core architecture of our logistics algorithm. He knows a dozen rival firms in Silicon Valley would pay a fortune for the raw mathematics that drive our predictive inventory matrix. He plans to smuggle the intellectual property out of the building and sell it to the highest bidder to fund his legal defense. Wyatt smirked, his fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. Should I shut down his terminal port? I can lock him out before the transfer reaches 10%. No, I answered softly. Let him initiate the download. Let him compile the files. Intent to steal is difficult to prosecute without physical evidence. We need him to complete the act. We need the undeniable proof of his espionage resting firmly in his palm. We watched the silent drama unfold through the camera feed. Bradley clicked his mouse rapidly, dragging large folders of data into the external drive directory. A progress bar appeared on his screen, slowly filling with a bright green hue. He stood, hovering over the monitor, chewing his thumbnail, his entire body coiled with unbearable tension. He needed a way to transport the stolen data past building security. He knew I would likely have guards waiting for him in the lobby. He needed a smuggling compartment. His eyes swept across the room, searching for a hiding place. He looked at his briefcase but shook his head, knowing it would be searched. Then his gaze settled on the damp cardboard box sitting in the corner. The same box John and Patricia had delivered days earlier to assert his dominance over my workspace. He rushed to the box and kicked aside the smaller plastic plaques. He reached in and extracted the largest item, the Collegiate Intramural Lacrosse Trophy. The hollow silver cup mounted on a thick faux wood pedestal. It was the physical manifestation of his unearned pride, the exact object my parents used to justify displacing me from my own office. Bradley flipped the trophy upside down. He grabbed a metal letter opener from the desk and pried the felt bottom away from the base. The cheap glue snapped, revealing a dark, hollow cavity inside the plastic pedestal. It was the perfect size for a solid-state drive. The profound irony of the moment echoed in the quiet monitoring room. He was utilizing his unearned hollow rewards to conceal his unearned stolen intellectual property. He was turning his own vanity into an instrument of his ultimate destruction. The progress bar on his monitor reached 100%. The green light flashed, signaling the completion of the data transfer. Bradley let out a visible gasp of relief, dropping his head back and staring at the ceiling. He believed he had won. He believed he had outsmarted the system, securing a golden ticket that would guarantee his financial survival. He reached out and wrapped his fingers around the silver thumb drive. "Spring the trap," I whispered. Wyatt hit the enter key, executing a command string he had written specifically for this exact scenario. On the surveillance feed, Bradley yanked the drive from the computer port. The instant the metal connection severed, his dual monitors flickered violently. The standard desktop background vanished, the screens turned a blinding, blaring crimson red. The harsh light bathed his sweaty face in a sickly, unnatural glow. Large, bold white letters materialized across both monitors, forming a devastating, undeniable message. "Unauthorized data transfer blocked. Security dispatched." Bradley stumbled backward, his legs hitting the edge of the mahogany desk. He looked at the thumb drive in his hand, and then back at the glaring red screens. The files he had downloaded were not the proprietary source code. Wyatt had rigged the executive directory with a honeypot, a decoy folder filled with encrypted garbage data tethered to a digital tripwire. The moment the drive disconnected, the system initiated a hard lockdown and triggered a silent alarm across the entire network. His golden ticket was worthless plastic, and he had just triggered the alarms confirming his intent to commit corporate espionage. "It is time to collect our guest," I said, turning away from the surveillance monitors. I walked out of the security room, with Valerie Hudson matching my measured pace. We navigated the corridor and stepped into the open bullpen. The red glow from the corner office spilled through the glass partitions, illuminating the surrounding cubicles. I did not rush. I approached the glass door with the calm, steady cadence of a homeowner finding a pest trapped in a snare. I pushed the heavy glass door open. The room smelled of stale scotch, nervous sweat, and heavy, suffocating defeat. Bradley stood frozen in the center of the room. His customized suit jacket rested on the floor where it had fallen during his frantic search. His silk shirt clung to his damp skin. In his left hand, he clutched the silver thumb drive. In his right hand, he held the hollow base of his collegiate lacrosse trophy. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to comprehend the sheer velocity of his downfall. He looked at me, and then shifted his terrified gaze to the New York venture capitalist standing firmly at my side. He knew there was no excuse he could fabricate to explain the red screens, the hidden drive, and the pried-open trophy. The evidence was absolute. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream or revel in a theatrical display of vengeance. Anger is a hot emotion reserved for equals, and the man shivering in front of me was not my equal. I looked at his shaking hands at the cheap plastic trophy he prized above his own integrity, and I felt a deep, profound pity. "You could not even steal correctly, Brad." I whispered the words, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. The final nail hammered cleanly into the coffin. His spirit broke, snapping under the unbearable weight of his own incompetence. He dropped the silver thumb drive. It hit the carpet with a soft, muffled thud. He stood there clutching the useless plastic cup, a hollow king, holding a hollow crown. The corporate war was over, but the final surrender required an audience. The enablers who built this monster were waiting in the boardroom down the hall, and it was time to present them with the shattered remains of their golden boy. I turned away from the glaring crimson monitors and gestured toward the open corridor. Bradley offered no resistance. He clutched the useless molded resin lacrosse base in his right hand. His knuckles turned stark white under the intense grip. His expensive leather loafers dragged across the commercial carpet, producing a hollow scraping rhythm. He moved with the heavy shuffling gait of a condemned prisoner approaching the gallows. Valerie Hudson walked beside me, maintaining her immaculate posture. She projected the icy detachment of an apex predator, observing the final moments of a wounded scavenger. We entered the glass-enclosed boardroom. John and Patricia sat rigidly in their ergonomic chairs. During our brief absence, the crushing reality of my financial dominance had settled over them like a weighted blanket. They looked significantly older. Their features appeared drawn and gray beneath the harsh fluorescent lighting. When my father saw his favored son shuffle through the doorway, clutching a piece of hollow sports memorabilia instead of a victorious contract, the last remaining shreds of his parental denial evaporated. I approached the polished mahogany table. I carried a thick manila folder I had prepared weeks in advance, anticipating this exact inevitable capitulation. I opened the cover, extracting a pristine stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. I aligned the edges with surgical precision. I slid the pile across the smooth wood, stopping it directly in front of my brother's vacant seat. "Sit down," I commanded. My tone carried no heat. It held only the frigid certainty of a presiding judge delivering a verdict. Bradley collapsed into the leather chair. The plastic trophy slipped from his trembling grip. It rolled aimlessly across the table until my father intercepted it. John stared at the empty cavity where the silver thumb drive was meant to be hidden, connecting the dots of his son's desperate espionage attempt. Resting in front of you is a binding termination agreement paired with a sworn affidavit I stated ensuring every syllable registered clearly in the quiet room. The affidavit details your misappropriation of corporate funds, amounting to $42,800. It includes a full confession of attempted corporate sabotage, acknowledging your effort to steal proprietary logistics algorithms using external hardware. I leaned forward, pressing my palms against the edge of the table. You possess two paths forward. Option 1 requires your immediate signature. You will confess to the embezzlement and the espionage. You will accept termination with zero severance compensation. You will formally relinquish any fabricated claims to equity stock options or intellectual property rights regarding this enterprise. You will surrender the keys to your leased company vehicle and hand over your access badge today. In exchange, I will retain this confession in a secure vault and decline to press felony charges. I paused, letting the weight of the offer sink into his fractured psyche. Then I gestured toward the lobby doors, outlining the alternative. Option 2 involves you refusing to sign. If you choose that route, Wyatt will instantly transmit the unredacted financial ledgers, the internal chat logs plotting extortion, and the network surveillance footage of your attempted data theft directly to the Columbus Police Fraud Division. Valerie and her team of financial auditors will serve as expert witnesses for the prosecution. You will leave this building in handcuffs today. You will face a minimum of 5 years in a state penitentiary. Patricia opened her mouth, her maternal instinct attempting one final desperate defense. "Charlene, please. He is your own flesh and blood. You cannot send him to a cell. We will mortgage our house. We will pay the money back." "Patricia, close your mouth!" John barked, his voice sharp and ragged. My father looked at the documents, and then at the undeniable evidence of guilt radiating from his son. John was a man who worshipped Midwestern social standing above all else. He belonged to elite country clubs. He attended prestigious charity galas. A high-profile criminal trial involving his namesake committing grand larceny against his own daughter would obliterate his reputation. The local elite would devour them. The public humiliation would be total and unrecoverable. John leaned over the table, his eyes burning with a cold, unforgiving pragmatism. He recognized a losing hand, and he chose immediate self-preservation. "Sign the paper, Bradley," my father ordered, his tone devoid of any familial warmth. Bradley looked up, his eyes swimming with desperate tears. "Dad, I can fix this. I can explain everything." "There is nothing left to explain," John interrupted, his jaw tight, You lied to us. You stole from her. You tried to burn down the only successful enterprise attached to our family name. You have embarrassed us beyond measure. Pick up the pen and sign the confession before she calls the authorities." The betrayal from his primary enabler broke the final tether holding Bradley to his fabricated reality. The golden child realized his pedestal had crumbled into dust. The parental shield he relied on for 3 decades vanished, replaced by a swift, brutal rejection. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked up a cheap plastic ballpoint pen resting near the documents. He hovered over the signature line. A single tear escaped his eye, tracing a wet path down his cheek. It splashed silently against the thick paper. It served as a physical manifestation of his evaporating ego. He pressed the ink to the page. His hand shook so severely, his signature resembled a chaotic, jagged seismograph reading. He initialed the forfeiture of equity. He signed the admission of guilt. He dated the immediate termination clause. He pushed the stack of papers back across the mahogany surface. His shoulders slumped, his chest hollowing out as he surrendered his fake crown, his employment, and his pride. The moment the ink dried, Valerie Hudson stepped forward. The New York venture capitalist had watched the entire domestic execution without uttering a single sound. Now she reached inside her tailored navy trench coat and withdrew a sleek, silver Mont Blanc fountain pen. She did not reach for a separate folder. She let a clear space on the table. Valerie picked up the multi-million-dollar Series A term sheet her analyst had prepared earlier that morning. She laid the pristine financial contract directly on top of the tear-stained confession letter. The heavy parchment covered the jagged signature, physically burying a legacy of failure under a monument of genuine earned success. Valerie uncapped her silver pen. The metal nib glided across the signature line with a smooth, authoritative grace. She executed a flawless flowing autograph, formally committing her institutional capital to Novalogics. She capped the pen and offered me a sharp, victorious nod. "Congratulations, founder," Valerie said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "Your capitalization table is clean. The funding is secured." I looked down at the documents. The poetic justice of the moment resonated deep within my chest. My brother's criminal admission served as the literal foundation for my corporate triumph. The boardroom conflict was resolved, leaving an atmosphere of cold, undeniable clarity. The legal checkmate provided a profound sense of vindication, ensuring my enterprise would never again suffer under the weight of unearned entitlement. But the final act of this operation required a physical cleansing. The toxic elements still occupied my headquarters, sitting frozen in their chairs. The time had come to execute an unceremonious extraction, removing the remnants of my family from the premises and ensuring they never crossed my threshold again. The ink dried on the heavy parchment. Valerie Hudson capped her silver fountain pen. The sharp click echoed in the silent boardroom. The financial transaction was sealed. The corporate war was over. I turned my attention to the broken man sitting at the head of the table. Wyatt stood waiting just outside the glass enclosure. I caught his eye and gave a single, brief nod. My lead developer stepped through the doorway. He did not wear a security uniform, but his broad shoulders and unyielding expression conveyed all the authority required for an extraction. He walked directly to Bradley and tapped his knuckles twice against the mahogany surface. "It is time to go," Wyatt stated, his voice flat and uncompromising. Bradley did not argue. He did not attempt another hollow negotiation. He pushed his leather chair back and stood up on trembling legs. He left his custom-tailored suit jacket draped over the back of the seat. He walked toward the corner of the room where the damp cardboard box rested on the floor. He crouched down and gathered his belongings. The chipped plastic plaques and the hollow base of his collegiate lacrosse trophy rattled softly against the cardboard. He lifted the heavy box, clutching it against his chest like a makeshift shield. He shuffled out of the boardroom. I followed a few paces behind, watching the physical manifestation of his defeat. We walked out onto the main engineering floor. The open bullpen was eerily quiet. The rhythmic clatter of mechanical keyboards had ceased entirely. Every developer, every analyst, and every junior engineer stood at their respective workstations. They watched in profound silence as the man who had tormented them for 6 months took his final, pathetic steps across the commercial carpet. Bradley kept his gaze locked onto his leather shoes, unable to meet the eyes of the staff he had so frequently demeaned. We reached the front lobby just as the main elevator chimed. The stainless steel doors slid apart, revealing a localized storm of artificial rage. Brittany stormed into the reception area. She wore a pristine white designer trench coat and oversized polarized sunglasses. Her spray tan looked uneven under the harsh fluorescent lobby lights. She held a sleek smartphone in her hand, ready to wage a scorched earth public relations battle. When she saw me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You are going to pay for this, Charlene," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "My lawyers are drafting the defamation lawsuit right now. You assaulted my husband. You hijacked his company. I will make sure you spend the next 10 years tied up in litigation. You will never secure a single dime of venture capital." I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a verbal rebuttal. I simply extended my hand toward Wyatt. He handed me a crisp white envelope. I stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and my furious sister-in-law. I pressed the envelope firmly against her chest, forcing her to take it. "Read it," I instructed, keeping my tone ice cold. Brittany ripped the flap open. She pulled out the legal cease and desist order printed on premium stationery. Behind the formal legal warning sat the raw, printed text messages we extracted from Trent's computer. She read the time-stamped communications between her husband and his accomplice. She read the exact verbatim script Bradley had written for her fabricated viral video. She saw the digital blueprint of their extortion plot laid bare in undeniable black and white ink. I watched the blood drain from her face. The shrill shrieking died in her throat. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She looked from the printed evidence to her husband holding his cardboard box of faded trophies. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. Bradley was not a wealthy startup founder. He was a documented criminal who had just forfeited his entire livelihood. Her country club membership, her designer handbags, and her suburban social status evaporated in that singular, agonizing moment. She folded the papers, stuffed them into her luxury purse, and turned around. She walked back into the elevator without uttering another syllable, pressing the lobby button with a shaking hand. John and Patricia emerged from the hallway. They walked with a slow, heavy cadence. The illusion of their perfect family had fractured into sharp, unrecoverable shards. They did not look at me. They did not offer a farewell or a hollow apology. They followed their son into the descending elevator. The metal doors slid shut, sealing them away. The lobby grew quiet, leaving only the gentle hum of the ventilation system. Valerie Hudson stood beside me. She offered a slow, respectful nod, recognizing the sheer totality of the victory. 1 year later, the Ohio Valley transitioned into a vibrant autumn. The air carried a familiar crisp chill, but the landscape of my life had fundamentally altered. Novologix no longer occupied that modest downtown high-rise. We relocated to a sprawling, state-of-the-art tech campus on the outskirts of Columbus. The expansive property featured walking trails, a dedicated data center, and a thriving workforce of over 200 employees. I sit in a genuine corner office. The walls do not hold tarnished sports trophies. They feature framed software patents and a recent cover of a national business journal. The publication named me a premier logistics innovator of the Midwest, highlighting our rapid expansion. The proprietary algorithms we deployed successfully revolutionized the regional healthcare supply chain. Hospitals across the state report unprecedented efficiency, reducing medical waste by staggering margins. The New York venture capital firm saw a return on their investment that exceeded every early projection. Bradley resides in a starkly different reality. Through the natural gossip of local industry connections, I receive periodic updates regarding his steep descent. He works at a regional consumer electronics retailer located in a fading suburban strip mall. He wears a mandatory blue synthetic polo shirt and a plastic name tag. He operates as a shift manager, taking direct orders from a store director who is a full decade younger than him. His days consist of rearranging television displays and enduring reprimands for minor inventory discrepancies. The financial collapse triggered the inevitable dissolution of his marriage. Brittany filed for divorce the moment the bank froze their joint checking accounts. She packed her luxury apparel and vacated their suburban home, leaving him to navigate the lengthy, painful foreclosure process alone. My parents also faced the severe consequences of their enabling behavior. Stripped of the financial support generated by my hidden shell company, John and Patricia were forced to downsize. They sold their pristine estate and relocated to a modest condominium on the edge of the city. They operate on a strict fixed budget, calculating their weekly grocery expenses. They no longer host lavish catered dinners. They cannot boast about their golden son at their affluent social gatherings. They occasionally leave voicemails on my secondary phone line. I delete the audio files without listening to a single second. The distance I maintain is not born of anger. It is born of a profound, healthy indifference. The ultimate poetic sting from my brother occurs during his daily retail shifts. When a delivery truck arrives at the loading dock of his electronics store, he must verify the incoming cargo. He picks up a handheld digital scanner to log the manifest. He presses the power button. The screen illuminates, flashing the distinctive blue and white NovaLogix logo. Our supply chain software became the industry standard for commercial inventory management across the region. He is forced to utilize my engineering genius to execute his menial physical tasks. Every single scan serves as a bitter, permanent reminder of the empire he tried to steal and the brilliant sister he vastly underestimated. I stand by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my spacious office. I hold a ceramic mug filled with dark roast coffee. I walked to the break room and poured the beverage myself. The Columbus skyline stretches toward the horizon, bathed in a warm, golden morning light. The journey required meticulous patience, a tolerance for deep disrespect, and a ruthless commitment to undeniable truth. If you find yourself trapped in the shadow of someone else's unearned ego, remember that you hold the pen to your own narrative. Do not argue with their delusions. Simply build your fortress, gather your undeniable data, and wait for the precise moment to pull the floor out from under them. True power does not need to shout. It does not require a stolen desk or a fabricated executive title. It merely needs to win. There is a peculiar unspoken tragedy woven into the very fabric of the modern American family. A tragedy disguised as profound love, wrapped securely in the shiny, manicured veneer of suburban success. We are raised on the foundational myth that the traditional family unit is a sanctuary, a place where unconditional support nurtures the next generation into capable, independent, and morally grounded adults. But as the dust settles on the corporate wreckage of the Cole family, a chilling alternate reality is exposed to the light. The story of a brilliant, marginalized sister, forced to meticulously dismantle the fraudulent empire of her entitled brother, is not merely a tale of corporate revenge or boardroom justice. It is a profound, devastating mirror reflecting the catastrophic failures of modern parenting. the desperate absence of emotional awareness, and the moral bankruptcy that occurs when fundamental fairness is sacrificed on the altar of blind favoritism. When we examine the wreckage left behind by John and Patricia, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable question about how we guide our children in this country. In American culture, fueled by the relentless pursuit of the American dream, we frequently confuse shielding our children from hardship with demonstrating our love for them. We buy the silver sports car for the C-average student, hoping the material reward will somehow inspire internal motivation. We manufacture corner office titles and create hollow executive positions to mask the sting of repeated, undeniable failures. We mistakenly believe that by padding the walls of their reality, we are giving them a competitive head start in a ruthless world. But true fairness in parenting does not mean insulating a child from the natural consequences of their actions. It means allowing them to feel the profound, necessary weight of their own missteps. By handing Bradley unearned power and unmerited praise, his parents did not save him. They systematically destroyed his capacity for genuine resilience. They raised a man equipped with the towering ego of a king, but the emotional fortitude of a toddler, utterly incapable of navigating a world that ultimately demands actual, measurable competence. And then there is the dark side of that toxic coin, the invisible child. For every golden sun propped up by manufactured praise, there is often a daughter sitting quietly in the shadows, her brilliance ignored, her personal boundaries violated, and her inherent worth reduced to the administrative tasks she can perform to sustain the family's grand illusion. This lack of emotional awareness within the traditional family structure is perhaps the most insidious betrayal of all. A home should be the very first place a child learns that their value is inherent, not transactional. When parents prioritize a manufactured image of success over the genuine emotional reality and intellectual contributions of their children, they do not build a family. They build a cold, calculating corporation where affection is the currency and blind compliance is the only acceptable product. The emotional toll this extracts from the capable, neglected child is immeasurable. It forces them to build defensive fortresses instead of emotional bridges, teaching them early on that familial trust is a dangerous liability and that cold, hard independence is the only true armor they will ever possess. At the core of long-term guidance lies the indispensable, often painful virtue of honesty. I do not mean the simple avoidance of lies, but a radical structural honesty that grounds a family firmly in reality. The Cole family operated on a foundation of systemic, generational deceit. The fake equity, the stolen corporate credit cards, the manufactured public relations smears, these were merely terminal symptoms of a disease that began years earlier in a suburban driveway. When parents refuse to hold a mirror up to their children's flaws, they actively participate in their eventual destruction. True family responsibility requires the immense courage to look a child in the eye and tell them they are not ready, they are not entitled, and they must work harder. It requires dismantling the fragile spray-tanned illusions of success before they calcify into a devastating lifelong delusion. A family built on the bedrock of truth can weather any external storm, but a family built on convenient lies and optical illusions will eventually collapse under the crushing weight of its own hollow architecture. In our relentless pursuit of status, we frequently lose sight of what it means to actually guide a human being into mature adulthood. True long-term guidance is not about providing a comfortable seat at a mahogany table or ensuring a smooth path to the top. It is about forging unbreakable character. It is about teaching a child that true power is entirely silent, that respect is earned through sweat, late nights, and unyielding integrity, and that no amount of custom-tailored suits or elite country club memberships can conceal a vacant intellect. When we rob our children of the struggle, we rob them of their ultimate triumph. We must cultivate homes where fairness is not merely a buzzword, but a daily, rigorously applied practice, where emotional awareness and empathy supersede the desperate, shallow need for perfect optics. Stories like this one resonate so deeply within us because they echo the silent, invisible battles fought behind closed doors in neighborhoods across the entire country. They remind us that the most dramatic, life-altering wars are often waged within our own bloodlines, against the people who were supposed to protect us. If you found a piece of your own truth in this reflection, if you have ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are in the shadow of someone else's unearned ego, please subscribe to the Intimately Told Stories channel. Share this journey with us and leave a comment below about the defining moments that shaped your own understanding of family dynamics. We are building a community that honors the unspoken, often painful truths of our lives, and your voice profoundly belongs here. As we look at the shattered remnants of this familial dynasty, we are left to ponder the true, unvarnished nature of kinship. We are conditioned from birth to believe that family is our ultimate safe harbor, the singular sacred place where we are protected from the harsh, unforgiving elements of the outside world. But perhaps this is the greatest, most dangerous lie we pass down through the generations. Sometimes, family is not the harbor. Sometimes family is the storm you must survive in order to build a sanctuary of your own. Conventional parenting wisdom dictates that a mother and father's highest duty is to provide unconditional support, to soften the blows of reality, and to catch their children every single time they fall. I reject that entirely. The highest duty of a parent is not to catch a falling child, but to let them hit the ground hard enough to realize they must learn to stand up on their own 2 feet. Loving your children equally does not mean serving them equal portions of comfort and praise. It means serving them equal portions of consequence. If we fail to teach them the brutal, unforgiving mathematics of reality inside the safety of our homes, the world will eventually teach them outside of it, and the world does not love them. We must look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we building strong, capable humans who can withstand the weight of reality? Or are we just blindly funding the fragile illusions of the weak? The answer to that question will never be found in our bank accounts or our job titles. It will only be found in those quiet, devastating moments when our children are finally forced to introduce themselves to the world, stripped of our protection, standing entirely on their own.